The shimmering Webb Marcus Rivera had logged over 3,000 flight hours inspecting high-voltage transmission lines across the southwestern United States, but he'd never seen anything quite like the Mojave Corridor's Tower 247 section. The helicopter's turbine, a robust system within their Bell 206 airframe, whined with a low-frequency resonance as pilot Sarah Chen angled them into position for the morning's inspection run. The desert floor spread beneath them like cracked leather under the climbing sun. The air inside the cabin carried a mix of scents. The sharp, metallic tang of ozone from the nearby conductors, and underneath it the fainter, slightly acrid smell of hot avionics from the slowly warming banks of monitoring equipment. 728 Zulu. Beginning approach. Sarah's voice crackled through the headset, the transmission clear but tinged with a slight digital compression.
Tower 247 coming up.
Starting visual approach at 200 feet. Protocol 7A initiated for asset integrity verification. Marcus adjusted his inspection camera, the familiar weight of the FLIR 8500 HD thermal imaging equipment settling against his chest harness. This particular stretch of 500 kilovolt transmission line, a critical artery in the regional power grid, ran for 87 miles through absolutely nothing. No roads, no settlements, just endless expanses of creosote bush and the skeletal silhouettes of Joshua trees. Its three-phase conductor bundle, each cable as thick as his arm, hung between massive lattice towers, each one standing 150 feet tall, their galvanized steel gleaming in the harsh desert light. A quick glance at the flight console confirmed all systems were nominal, with atmospheric parameters holding steady. His ruggedized data pad displayed the full schematic for the sector, detailing a current throughput of nearly 2,000 megawatts. The inspection protocol was routine, a sequence memorized over years of flights. Visual examination of insulators for cracks or contamination, conductor wear assessment via high magnification optics, vegetation clearance verification to prevent flashover, and thermal scanning for hotspots indicating resistance buildup. Marcus had performed this exact sequence on this exact line 17 times over the past 4 years. Tower 247 sat at mile marker 43, positioned at the highest elevation point along the corridor, where the line crossed a weathered basalt ridge. Distance to target, 400 meters, Sarah announced, her professional detachment evident in every syllable. She was former military, accustomed to precision operations. The digital anemometer readout on her console was stable, wind speed holding at 6 knots northeast. Conditions optimal for asset assessment. Marcus raised his gyroscopically stabilized binoculars, focusing on the suspension insulators, those critical porcelain discs that kept hundreds of thousands of volts from arcing to ground through the steel tower structure. Each insulator string consisted of 28 individual units, their distinctive white and brown glazing designed to shed desert dust and prevent tracking current. He methodically logged each string. Log entry 731. Insulator strings on 247 appear nominal. No visible signs of corona damage or particulate buildup. Everything was by the book, but something was wrong with the light. Between Tower 247 and Tower 248, a span of roughly 1,200 feet, the air itself seemed to shimmer with an unusual quality, like heat distortion, but far more structured and coherent. Marcus blinked, assuming it was a simple atmospheric refraction playing tricks on his eyes. The Mojave regularly hit 115 degrees in summer, creating optical phenomena that could confuse even experienced observers, especially when observing high-energy infrastructures. He cross-referenced the optical distortion with their current altitude and ambient temperature readings. The values didn't correlate with any known form of thermal lensing. Sarah, can you hold position at 200 meters out? Per section 4.1.b of the visual inspection mandate, all optical aberrations must be logged. I'm seeing some kind of structural visual anomaly near vector 34 alpha. I can copy that. Holding position? The helicopter steadied, its nose pointed directly at Tower 247's southern face. The hum of the rotors remained constant, a dull thrum against the metallic exterior of the craft, a sound Marcus knew as intimately as his own heartbeat. Marcus switched to the thermal camera, scanning the conductor bundles for temperature variations. The highly sensitive sensor array was functioning perfectly. The display showed normal operating temperatures, the aluminum core steel-reinforced cables running at approximately 194 degrees Fahrenheit under current load conditions, well within acceptable parameters for sustained operation. He panned across to Tower 248, the neighboring structure standing stark against the cloudless sky. His internal chronometer registered 7:34 Zulu time. That's when he saw it clearly. Stretching between the two towers, suspended in three-dimensional space around the energized conductors, was an impossibly intricate network of filaments. They caught the sunlight in fragments, creating brief, scintillating flashes that disappeared the instant he tried to focus on them directly. The entire structure resembled a vast geometric web, not the random architecture of spider silk, but something methodically constructed with mathematical precision, far exceeding any known biological or artificial matrix. The filaments moved with an unnerving, almost fluid persistence, altering their refractive index with imperceptible shifts in response to the line's massive electromagnetic field. "Sarah, are you observing this phenomenon?" Marcus heard the uncertainty creeping into his own voice, a stark contrast to his usual composure during high-stress inspections. "My optical sensors are detecting an anomalous structural projection." "Cross-check your primary visual." "No, I'm seeing what? I've got clear line of sight to both towers. Conductors look nominal by a standard visual sweep." Her response was clipped, indicating no immediate visual anomaly on her end. "No abnormal energy signatures on my telemetry, Marcus. The EM scanner is showing a localized fluctuation, but it's not consistent with standard corona discharge." "Car, move us closer, 50 meters. Adjust approach vector to 72 beta." The helicopter eased forward with a subtle shift in the cabin's gyroscopic balance, rotor wash disturbing the desert air below. As they approached, the filament network became increasingly visible, though it seemed to exist at the very threshold of perception, present one moment, vanishing the next, like trying to see individual air molecules under conditions of extreme atmospheric clarity. The structure had a disconcerting elasticity to it, shifting subtly in response to indiscernible forces. The strands were too fine, too perfect. Marcus's hands moved automatically to document the phenomenon, his camera clicking rapidly, capturing high-resolution optical and infrared spectra. Through the viewfinder, the filaments appeared as hairline traces of silver-white light, each one perfectly straight, connecting the main power conductors to something. The network extended in all directions, creating a three-dimensional lattice of stunning complexity. The sheer volume of interconnected points defied conventional structural engineering principles. "Distance 50 meters, Sarah confirmed, her tone now laced with a hint of concern. "Marcus, the radio's acting weird. I'm getting intermittent feedback. The system log shows a data corruption flag. Protocol was violated at 0347 GMT yesterday, according to the system log.n." The headset exploded with sound. Not static, not interference, but a sustained, perfectly uniform hum that bypassed every frequency filter in their noise-canceling equipment. The tone seemed to resonate directly inside Marcus's skull, a low-band frequency sweep between 15 and 20 hertz, below typical human hearing but felt as a visceral pressure. It was a vibrational resonance that bypassed auditory processing, going straight to the core of his perception. "Auditory interference logged at 073512 Zulu," Sarah stated, her voice tight. "Source unknown. Filtering protocols are non-responsive." Sarah's hands jerked on the controls, the helicopter wobbling with a sudden lurching motion. What in the hell is that auditory anomaly? Then came the vocalizations. Underneath the hum, woven through it like threads in fabric, Marcus could hear voices. Dozens of them, hundreds, all speaking simultaneously in tones just below the threshold of comprehension. Syllables that almost formed words, phonemes that suggested language without quite achieving it. The cacophony was a constant pressure against his eardrums, a disorienting assault on his senses, a chaotic stream of raw data. His vision blurred, the precise readouts on his thermal imager wavering at the edges. The thermal camera slipped from his grip, dangling by its safety strap, swaying erratically against his uniform. He could feel the fine hairs on his arms standing on end, his body's nervous system reacting to a powerful, unknown electromagnetic field. The sensation was like 1,000 tiny needles prickling his skin. The vocalizations were trying to resolve into meaning. He could feel it, his brain desperately attempting to parse the overlapping voices into coherent communication. Individual words seemed to emerge from the chaos, momentarily coalescing before dissolving back into disarray. Calibration, frequency, iteration, vessel, acquisition, sequence. Sarah, we need to extract from this location. Marcus's throat constricted, the words catching in his windpipe. The filament network was glowing now, pulsing with a cold, bioluminescent light that shouldn't exist in inorganic material, its intensity increasing with every passing second. Each filament hummed in harmony with the sound in their headsets, creating visible vibration patterns that rippled across the web's geometry, a disturbing display of symbiotic energy transfer. The air pressure in the cabin noticeably decreased, the altimeter flickering erratically, accompanied by a faint crackling sensation on his skin. The helicopter lurched violently. Sarah was fighting the controls, her face twisted in concentration or pain. Marcus couldn't tell which, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Warning lights began to flash across her console. The vocalizations were intensifying, achieving brief moments of almost clarity before dissolving back into incomprehensible murmuration, a torrent of unintelligible data. Can't. Controls aren't responding. Input lag is critical. Full cascade failure imminent. Sarah's words fragmented, her voice strained. The instrument panel flickered ominously, displaying cryptic error codes. FCS ERR 0-7A, COM FLT cascade. Through his blurring vision, Marcus saw the filament network beginning to contract. The individual strands were drawing together, tightening around the high-voltage conductors like a living, predatory entity. Where they touched the energized cables, brief coronas of violet light erupted. Not the normal orange-yellow of electrical and arc, but something alien and incandescent. Something that hurt to look at directly. Dark residue began to weep from the points of contact, sizzling as it dripped into the air. The thermal camera, still dangling but now active, its display flickering to life, showed the filaments burning with impossible heat. Temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, yet the conductors themselves remained at normal operating levels. The physics made no sense, violating every thermodynamic principle Marcus knew. It was a localized energy anomaly of unprecedented scale, an impossible heat transfer with no discernible source or sink. Marcus's fingers found the helicopter's emergency transmitter, fumbling past the cool metallic surface of the casing. He keyed the mic, his voice barely his own, a raw, desperate gasp. Control, this is Inspection 27. We have a code red at Tower 247. I repeat, code red. Visual confirmation of unknown material on energized conductors. Material is exhibiting predatory behavior. Possible equipment hazard. Requesting immediate extraction parameters and backup. And the vocalizations synchronized. Every voice in that terrible chorus suddenly spoke in perfect unison. And though the words remained incomprehensible, their intent burned through Marcus's consciousness like acid. This was not communication as he understood it. This was recognition, a direct telemetry burst. The filament network knew they were here. It had registered their presence, and it was responding with terrifying precision. The web contracted further, pulling the high-voltage conductors toward each other with forces that should have snapped the suspension insulators instantly. Instead, the ceramic discs began to glow with the same bioluminescent quality as the filaments, as if the energy was being channeled through pathways that shouldn't exist, transmuted by an unknown mechanism. There was a palpable pressure against the helicopter's chassis, an unseen hand trying to crush it, making the fuselage groan in protest. Sarah, we need to enact immediate evasive maneuvers now. The helicopter's electrical systems went haywire. Every indicator light on the instrument panel blazed simultaneously, a chaotic symphony of alarms and warnings. The radio erupted with overlapping distress calls and voices Marcus didn't recognize, reporting emergencies at locations they weren't even near, phantom transmissions from unknown sources. The scent of ozone was now overwhelmed by the smell of burning insulation. Sarah yanked the collective, pulling them into a desperate vertical climb, the engines protesting with a high-pitched whine. The vocalizations rose to a crescendo that felt like it would split Marcus's skull, an unbearable internal pressure. That's when he saw movement at the center of the filament web. Something was forming there, where the network's geometry focused to a single point between the two towers. The space itself seemed to be folding, creating depth where there should have been only air, a non-Euclidean geometric cascade. Through that impossible aperture, Marcus glimpsed structures, vast, angular constructions that existed in too many dimensions for his human brain to process. Their surfaces reflecting frequencies of light his eyes weren't designed to perceive, shifting and changing in a kaleidoscopic dance. And suspended in the exact center of that opening, perfectly preserved within a cocoon of those shimmering filaments, was a human figure. The figure's eyes opened, meeting Marcus's gaze across 200 meters of desert air, and in that instant of direct cognitive connection, the vocalizations finally resolved into a single, crystal-clear voice that spoke directly into his mind, bypassing auditory pathways entirely. The transmission was cool, clinical, and devoid of emotion. Inspection confirmed. Proceed to secondary observation point. Your integration is pending. The helicopter's engines vocalized as Sarah pushed them into maximum climb, struggling for altitude. But Marcus couldn't tear his eyes away from that suspended figure. Because despite the impossible situation, despite the geometric madness of the filament network, and the physics-defying phenomena surrounding Tower 247, he recognized the face staring back at him with an unnerving, placid calm. It was his own. The sirens call the submersible the Hades felt more like a tomb than a vessel. The crisp, metallic tang of ozone from an overworked electrical panel mixed with the stale, recycled air, a constant reminder of our isolation. Thousands of feet below the surface of the Pacific, it was a cramped titanium sphere of humming machinery and flickering screens, our home and our prison for the next 3 weeks. I'm Alex, a xenolinguist, which is a fancy way of saying I study strange signals from places they shouldn't be. With me were Elias, our captain, and a grizzled veteran of countless deep-sea missions, and Maya, our sharp-as-a-tack systems engineer, whose fingers moved across her console like a concert pianist's. Our mission, designated Project Chimera by corporate, was to investigate a series of anomalous, low-frequency acoustic signals emanating from the Challenger Deep within the Mariana Trench. Corporate called it a unique research opportunity. We called it a payday that justified the risk. The digital mission clock on the main console read, Mission Day 1, froze your hours as we began our controlled descent into the crushing black. The first few days were a study in monotonous precision. System checks at the top of every hour, sonar sweeps every 15 minutes. The endless, impenetrable darkness outside the reinforced viewport became a hypnotic void. The pressure here is a physical entity, a constant, heavy hand on the hull that you feel in your bones. You learn to live with the groans and creaks of the titanium sphere, the percussive pops and shrieks of the abyssal plane, telling yourself it's just the vessel settling under pressures that could turn a human body to jelly in an instant. I'd log the ambient acoustics, running them through spectrographic analysis, finding nothing but the deep, mournful songs of fin whales and the geologic size of the Earth's crust. Log 072-1408. Environmental audio remains within expected parameters. Hull stress sensor readings are green. Crew biometrics are nominal. The abyss is quiet. Too quiet. It was on the 4th day during my watch at O2Y that the routine shattered. A sudden violent shudder ran through the hull, and the lights flickered erratically before dying completely, plunging us into absolute blackness. The low hum of the engines and life support faltered, replaced by an unnerving silence, a power surge. Emergency lighting flickered on a moment later, casting long, dancing shadows across the cramped cockpit. Elias, who seemed to sleep with one eye open, was instantly alert, already unstrapping from his bunk. Log it, Maya. Main power bus continuity protocol was violated at 0218 air, he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through my rising panic. Check the battery levels and external capacitor charge. Maya was already at her console, its screen the only steady source of light. Her fingers flew across the keys. Levels are stable, Captain. All internal systems are rebooting. It wasn't an internal fault. External sensors are picking up a massive energy reading nearby. 500 terajoules localized. It's not geological. The signature is structured, repeating on a prime number sequence. My own dark residue ran cold. Structured. That word doesn't belong in this abyss. Bring it up on the main screen, Elias commanded, swinging his legs out of his cot and moving to stand behind me, his presence a steadying weight. A cascade of raw data filled the screen. resolving into a 3D sonar image as Maya rerouted auxiliary power. It was a shipwreck, but unlike any we'd expected. It was the unmistakable silhouette of a submarine. A World War II-era relic, not on any known manifest or wreck database. The I-401 Kairyua. Elias breathed, his eyes wide, his voice barely a whisper. A present story, one of the Sentoku-class prototypes. It vanished in '45. Rumor was it was carrying something special. Bioacoustic research from Unit 731, Doc. Against my better judgment, but spurred on by the promise of the salvage rights of a lifetime and the scientific implications, we decided to investigate. The Hades was a salvage vessel, after all, equipped for exactly this kind of deep-water recovery. We maneuvered closer, a slow, painstaking process. Our powerful external LEDs cut through the swirling gloom to reveal the decaying hull of the Kairyu. It was eerily intact, resting on a flat basaltic outcrop as if it had been gently placed there. There were no signs of catastrophic damage, no crumpled hull or blast marks one would expect. It was just sitting there, patient and silent. Maya ran a magnetometer scan. "Hull's colder," she reported. "The reactor's been dead for decades, but that energy source is still pulsing from inside. It's not nuclear, Dot." Donning our A7L hardshell excursion suits, heavy, cumbersome things that made you feel like a lead doll, Elias and I prepared for a spacewalk into the deep. Maya would monitor from the Hades, our lifeline. The plan was simple: get inside, assess the salvage potential, locate the logbook, and find the source of that impossible energy signal. The pressure outside was immense, a palpable force against the polycarbonate visor of my suit. The silence was the most unsettling part, absolute and profound, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the static-laced crackle of the comms. We used a thermic lance to cut through the main hatch, the superheated plasma hissing against 80-year-old steel. The metal peeled away and we slipped inside. The interior was a time capsule of decay. Metal groaned under the pressure, and a thick, fine silt of marine snow coated every single surface like a funeral shroud. We found a single logbook in the captain's quarters, miraculously preserved in a waterproof case clutched in the skeletal hands of the captain himself, slumped over his desk. I gently pried it free, my heavy-gloved fingers clumsy. The ink was faded but legible. It spoke of a melody from the deep, a song that promised ascension and release from their metal cage. The crew had become obsessed, forsaking their duties, even their sustenance, just to listen. The last entry was chilling. The handwriting devolved into a near unreadable scrawl. "The song is a lie. It is not salvation. It is hunger. It promises everything and takes it all." Then a single frantic scratch of ink. "Don't listen." As I read those words aloud over the comm, we heard it. It wasn't a sound in the traditional sense. It was a faint melodic humming that seemed to resonate not in our ears, but directly in the bones of our skulls. It was beautiful, a complex harmony that felt both ancient and alien, yet profoundly wrong. It bypassed hearing and went straight for the soul, a vibration that promised warmth in the freezing cold. "Captain, do you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my training. "I hear it, Alex." Elias's voice was tight, strained. "Maya, are you picking this up on the sub's hydrophones?" "A negative, Captain." Her voice crackled back, laced with heavy static. "All channels are clear on my end. Your biometrics are spiking, though. Both of you. Heart rate is over 130. Adrenaline is through the roof." The song grew louder, warmer, more inviting. I felt a pull, a deep primal urge to unlatch my helmet, to let the water and the music in. It felt like the right thing to do. I saw visions of sunlight on a beach, of faces I loved. A stark contrast to the cold, crushing darkness around us. Elias slapped the side of my helmet hard, the metallic clang and the physical jolt breaking the spell. "It's a siren song, Alex. A mimetic agent. Cognitive warfare, fight it!" His words were a lifeline in the mesmerizing tide of sound. Then the sonar on my suit's HUD pinged. A single large biological contact approaching fast. "Bearing 180, range 50 meters and closing." What is that?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. On the Kairyu's bridge, we peered through the grimy, silt-covered viewport. A shape materialized from the gloom drawn by our lights. It was vaguely humanoid, but impossibly long and slender, moving with a fluid grace that defied the crushing pressure. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, revealing a faint vascular network beneath. It had far too many joints in its limbs which bent at sickeningly unnatural angles. Its face, if you could call it that, was a smooth, pale plate of chitin, and where a mouth should be, there was only a pulsating bioluminescent sac that glowed with a soft, blue light, pulsing perfectly in time with the song. It was a silent vocalization, a beautiful, horrifying void where features should be. My mind, reeling, finally put the pieces together. The crew of the Kyryu hadn't starved or run out of air. They had answered the call. They had opened the hatches. I forced my gaze away from the creature and toward the outer hull of the spectral sub, my suit lights tracing the corroded metal. I saw it, their bloated figures fused and absorbed into the metal itself, their faces locked in expressions of ecstatic horror. They hadn't died. They'd been incorporated into some grotesque living reef. We scrambled back towards our entry point, the creature's song a physical pressure in my mind, begging me to stay. "Maya, prep for immediate departure," Elias yelled into his comm, his voice ragged with exertion. "Seal the outer doors the second we're in. Emergency protocols." The creature was faster than we were. As Elias was halfway through the hatch back into the Hades airlock, one of its long, spindly appendages shot out with impossible speed and wrapped around his leg. He cried out, not in pain, but in sheer surprise. The creature wasn't trying to harm him. It was trying to pull him out, to have him join the silent, smiling choir on the hull. The appendage began to constrict, and the Kyryu's ancient hull groaned under the strain as our own vessel was pulled against it. The thing was trying to pull the Hades closer. A high-pitched, resonant vocalization echoed through the water, not from the creature, but from the straining metal. Elias made a decision, the kind only a captain can make. "Alex, get inside. Cycle the inner door. Seal the forward compartment, now!" he yelled, his voice strained but clear. He looked at me through his visor, his eyes clear and resolute. "That's an order, xenolinguist." He grabbed a heavy, rusted spanner from a toolkit near the airlock, the closest thing to an object to use for leverage. "I'll buy you time. Get to the surface. Tell them what's down here. Don't let them come back." I hesitated, my body frozen, my mind screaming in protest. He shoved me backward into the Hades. "Go." The last I saw of him was his silhouette, swinging the heavy metal object at the creature's limb. There was no defiance in the act, only a grim, professional necessity. Then a sickening crunch of metal and bone, and a final guttural vocalization that was cut short. The emergency bulkhead between me and the airlock slammed shut, the hydraulic hiss sealing his fate. I stumbled back into the cockpit, my body shaking uncontrollably. Maya stared at me, her face ashen. What happened?" "Where's the captain?" "He's gone," I choked out, the words feeling like shards of glass. The song." He sacrificed himself. "Get us out of here. Now, maximum ascent." We were ascending, but the ordeal wasn't over. The song was still in my head, fainter now that we were moving away, but persistent. A lingering promise. I tried to focus on the readouts, on the increasing distance from the sea floor, but the melody wormed its way through my thoughts, a parasite of sound. I looked at Maya. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, glazed over. She was staring at the viewport into the impenetrable blackness beyond our lights. She started humming. It was the same melody, the same horrific, beautiful, irresistible tune. "The song is so beautiful, Alex," she whispered, a serene, beatific smile spreading across her face. "He's calling to us. Elias isn't gone. He's just ascended. He's waiting for us." Then she lunged for the emergency ballast controls, her intent clear, to flood the tanks and send us plummeting back down into its embrace. I tackled her, sending us both floating in the cramped cockpit. We struggled, a desperate zero-gravity dance to prevent our doom. Her nails bit into the flesh of my arm, drawing dark residue. She was strong, unnaturally so, her movements fluid and purposeful, no longer human. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, her voice a discordant harmony with the song still echoing in my head. "We have to let it in. We have to be with them. We can be part of the music." I managed to pin her against the main control panel. "Maya, stop." "Snap out of it," I pleaded, but I saw it was no use. The person I knew was gone. I saw a glint of metal in her hand, a maintenance shard she must have palmed, sharp as a scalpel. It wasn't designed as an object for harm, just a tool, but in her hand its purpose was lethally clear. The struggle was frantic, a clumsy, terrifying brawl in a metal can miles beneath the waves. I don't remember the specifics. My mind has blocked it out. There was only the sickening finality of it. I had to neutralize Maya. It was her or me, and the survival of the mission, the preservation of the warning. The ascent was agonizingly lonely. The silence in the Hades was heavier and more crushing than the ocean had ever been. There was only the constant hum of the life support systems and the phantom ghost of a melody at the edge of my hearing. I broke the surface 6 hours later. The submersible a battered wreck, its outer hull scarred from the impact with the Kairyu. The rescue team found me shortly after, huddled in the dark cockpit. The Kairyu's logbook clutched to my chest. They asked about Elias and Maya. I told them there was an accident during the EVA, a hull breach in the airlock. The official report will mention her figure, lost to the trench during a sudden pressure surge. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Who would believe me? They'd think I was insane, that nitrogen narcosis or hypoxia had cooked my brain. They would need proof, and all the proof I had was a dead crew and a song in my head. Now I sit in this sterile debriefing room, the Kairyu's logbook on the table in front of me, sealed in an evidence bag. The official report will say it was a tragic accident caused by unforeseen geological pressures and equipment malfunction. It's a lie, but it's a lie that keeps the world sane. A lie that keeps the lid on a part of the ocean that should have remained forgotten. A tomb that should never have been disturbed. But I know the truth. I survived, but I didn't escape. The song is still out there, echoing in the deepest, darkest parts of the world. And it's still hungry. I'm a deep sea diver, and what I found at the bottom of the ocean still haunts me. My name is Caden, and I work in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The crushing, black expanse of the deep ocean. I'm a saturation diver, a specialist who performs construction, maintenance, and repair on deep-sea structures, mostly for oil and gas companies. It's a job that requires a very specific kind of person. Someone calm under pressure, meticulous, and comfortable with long periods of isolation in a metal can hundreds of feet beneath the waves. But there's a reason they pay us so much. Being a sat diver means living in a cramped, pressurized chamber for up to a month, breathing a helium-oxygen mix that makes your voice sound like a cartoon character. When it's time to work, you get into a diving bell, which is lowered to the work depth. The pressure is immense, the darkness absolute, and the cold is a physical thing that seeps into your bones. Even with a hot water suit, the metallic tang of the scrubber recycled heliox mix was a constant, sharp presence in the back of my throat. A reminder of the fragile, artificial world keeping the abyss at bay. You learn to trust your equipment, your training, and most importantly, your dive partner. A persistent, low-level hum from the CO2 scrubbers became the background music to our lives. A sound so constant you only noticed it when it stopped. My partner on this last job was Marco. We'd been through a dozen dives together, a solid team. The job was standard procedure, a routine inspection and minor weld repair on a pipeline manifold at 600 feet in the North Atlantic. The company was called Hyperion Marine, a new player in the offshore game, but their equipment was top of the line. We were 7 days into our 28-day saturation. Life in the habitat was monotonous, a cycle of sleep, eat, and prepare for the next dive. Marco seemed a little on edge, more quiet than usual, but I chalked it up to the sat lag, the strange psychological drag that sets in after a week under pressure. "You good, man?" I asked him one evening, our high-pitched voices chirping in the small chamber. He was staring at the small porthole, at the inky blackness outside our temporary home. "Just thinking her," he chirped back. "This place. It feels different this time, Olderbow." I laughed it off. "It's all old down here, Marco. As old as it gets." The day of the incident was dive day 3. Our shift started at 200. We suited up in silence, the pre-dive checks a familiar ritual. Our heavy helmets were locked into place, comms checked and life support umbilicals connected. The diving bell was our elevator to the seafloor. As the hatch sealed, the world was reduced to the hum of the life support, the crackle of the comms and the view from the small portholes. Bell launch initiated, came the calm professional voice of our dive supervisor, Elias from topside control, pressure equalizing to work depth. 600 feet and the descent was smooth. Marco and I sat on the small benches watching the pressure gauges climb. Outside, the powerful lights of the bell cut a cone of white through the black. illuminating a blizzard of marine snow, the constant, gentle rain of organic detritus from the world above. On the bottom, Elias announced, "Hatch pressure is equal. You are clear to exit." I went first. As I pulled myself out of the bell, the sheer scale of the abyss always hit me for a second. Our lights carved out a small bubble of reality in an infinite, timeless void. The pipeline manifold was a skeletal metal structure, 20 feet high, already beginning to be colonized by strange, pale sea life. Our ROV, a small car-sized submarine, was already on site, its floodlights adding to our visibility. "Okay. Caden, Marco, begin your visual inspection, Sector 1, Elias instructed. "Roger that, topside," and I replied, my voice a clear, low tone in my helmet, unscrambled by the comms unit. Proceeding to Sector 1. We moved slowly, our boots heavy on the silty seabed. The work was methodical. We checked for stress fractures, corrosion, and leaks, our helmet cameras feeding a live signal back to Elias and the engineers on the surface. Everything was normal. An hour into the dive, we were approaching the section that needed repair. That's when Marco stopped. "Call, Caden, you see that?" His voice crackled. I turned. He was pointing his light at the base of the manifold, near where it was anchored to the seafloor. "See what?" "I'm not getting anything on camera." "Again, the writing," he said, his breathing quickening slightly. On the leg, and I moved closer, my own powerful beam joining his. The structure was covered in marine growth, but where his light was focused, I could just make out something. They were symbols, deeply gouged into the metal, not part of any manufacturing process I had ever seen. They were geometric, but in a way that felt wrong, with angles that seemed to twist and defy logic. "Topside, you seeing this?" I asked, moving my camera in for a close-up. Unidentified markings on the primary anchor at grid reference Alpha 9. There was a pause. "Stand by, Caden," Elias said. "We're cross-referencing with the original blueprints. We have no record of any such markings." Marco was drifting closer, almost entranced. "They're not from us," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "There." "Halt, Bun, I'm Marco. Back away from the structure," I ordered, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. "Let's stick to the protocol," and he didn't listen. He reached out a gloved hand and touched the symbols. The moment his fingers made contact, our comms erupted with a blast of static, a high-pitched squeal that made me flinch. All the lights, ours, the bells, the ROVs, flickered violently. "What was that?" I yelled. "Elias, what's going on?" "And we don't know." Elias's voice was tense. "And we're reading a massive energy spike originating from your position. What did you do?" The lights stabilized, but the atmosphere had changed. The darkness outside our bubble of light felt heavier, more attentive. "I didn't do anything," Marco said, his voice now laced with panic. It did it. "And dive control, be advised, biosigns for Diver 2 are redlining. Heart rate has breached 180 BPM. Abort protocol is now recommended." I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Marco, get back to the bell." "Now, I commanded. But he was staring past me, out into the darkness beyond the range of our lights. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" "All I hear is you hyperventilating." "Calm down." In a voice where he stammered, "It's singing." I couldn't hear anything but the familiar hum of my own rebreather. But Marco was convinced. He started to turn in a slow circle, his light beam cutting frantic arcs through the water. "It's out there. Just beyond the lights. It's calling Dawn. Marco, this is a direct order. Return to the bell." Elias's voice boomed over the comms, sharp and authoritative. "No." So Marco's vocalization was high and thin. It says the deep is hungry. It says we woke it up." Then he did something that chilled me to the core. He started fumbling with the latches on his helmet. "Marco, no." I lunged for him, but in the heavy suit my movements were slow and clumsy. He was surprisingly strong, fueled by terror. He shoved me back and I tumbled onto the soft silt. "Marco, if you take that helmet off, the pressure will neutralize you instantly," I shouted, scrambling to my feet. "You know that?" "Oh, it's not for me," he whispered, his voice distorted. "It's a gift. An offering." With a final, desperate twist, he worked a latch free. I saw a stream of bubbles escape from his helmet seal. He wasn't trying to take it off. He was trying to break the seal to let the ocean in. "Caden, get him under control," Elias yelled. I charged again, this time managing to grab his arm. We wrestled, a grotesque slow-motion ballet on the ocean floor. His other hand was still clawing at his helmet. His breathing was a ragged series of gasps, and then I heard it too. It wasn't a voice, not a song. It was a sound, a low-frequency vibration that I felt more than heard, resonating through my helmet and the bones of my skull. It was a deeply unsettling ancient sound, like a vast intelligence stirring from an eon of slumber. Marco stopped struggling. He went completely still. "It's here," he said, his voice eerily calm. I followed his gaze. At the very edge of our light, something was moving. It was huge, its form indistinct, blending with the blackness. It wasn't swimming. It was unfolding, a shape of impossible geometry, a silhouette of living shadow against the deeper black. It had no features, no eyes, but I felt its attention on us, a cold, analytical pressure against my mind. "Topside. Topside, do you see this?" My voice was a choked whisper. There was no response, just static. The thing out in the dark began to drift forward, slow, inexorable. Marco started to laugh, a horrible, high-pitched giggle that echoed in my ears. "It's beautiful," he chirped. Then, with a sudden violent spasm, he tore his umbilical from his suit. The thick bundle of hoses carrying his air, heat, and communications was ripped away. An alarm blared in my helmet. Diver 2 offline. He was on emergency backup air now. He had about 3 minutes. Instead of trying to reconnect, he turned and started walking away from the bell, out into the crushing darkness, towards the approaching shape. "Marco!" I shouted, a raw, useless vocalization. He didn't look back. He just walked one heavy step after another until he was swallowed by the void. A moment later, the low vibrational hum intensified and then abruptly stopped, and he was gone. "He's gone, topside. Marco's gone," I said, my voice breaking. A single frantic word came through the static. "Evacuate," I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled back to the bell, my heart hammering against my ribs, expecting at any moment to feel that cold, analytical presence focus on me. I hauled myself inside, sealed the lower hatch, and slammed my hand on the emergency ascent button. "Bell is ascending. Repeat, bell is ascending on emergency power," I yelled into the dead comms. The ride up was the longest 10 minutes of my life. I was alone in the bell, staring out the porthole into the black, half expecting to see that impossible shape rising with me. When the bell finally docked with the habitat, the crew hauled me out. They told me later I was weeping, repeating Marco's name over and over. They put me in medical isolation. The official story from Hyperion Marine was that Marco had suffered a catastrophic equipment malfunction, coupled with deep-sea psychosis, a known, if rare, risk of the job. They said I had suffered from sympathetic hypoxia and a stress-induced hallucination. My umbilical camera feed, they claimed, showed nothing but me wrestling with Marco before he severed his connection and walked into the darkness. His camera had cut out the moment he touched the strange symbols. The energy spike was logged as an Hulk or unexplained seismic event. They decommissioned me, of course, medically unfit for deep-sea work. They gave me a generous severance package and a non-disclosure agreement thicker than a phone book. But I know what I saw. And I know what I heard. A week after I was back on the surface, I got an anonymous, encrypted email. It contained a single audio file. When I played it, I heard the crackle of a deep-sea comm and then a voice. It was Marco's voice, not the high-pitched Heliox version, but his real deep voice as if he were speaking in a normal atmosphere. He was singing. It was a strange, discordant melody, and the words were in a language I didn't recognize, but the tone was one of pure, ecstatic worship. The recording was only 30 seconds long, but at the very end, his song was joined by another sound, that same deep, vibrational hum I had felt on the seafloor. I traced the email's origin as best I could. It was routed through a dozen proxy servers, but the final node was a Hyperion Marine server. A server that, according to public records, didn't exist. I also looked into the company's other projects. They had a pattern of setting up operations in the deepest, most remote parts of the ocean, places where other companies wouldn't go. And in 3 of those locations, there had been dozed accidents. Divers lost. Submersibles vanished. All written off as equipment failure or human error. They're not drilling for oil. I don't know what they're looking for, but I know they found it. They woke it up. The symbols on that pipeline weren't a warning. They were an invitation. A key. Sometimes late at night I can still feel it. That low hum. A faint vibration in the floorboards. I think it knows I saw it. and I think sooner or later, it will want to finish the conversation. I live as far from the ocean as I can now, but I know it doesn't matter. The world is mostly water. We live on the shores of an ocean far deeper and darker than we can imagine, and there are things in the depths that have been sleeping for a very, very long time, and they're waking up. Decompression log Diver 1, Caden, Day 1. Post-incident. Subject remains in isolated medical observation. Shows signs of acute psychological trauma. Refuses to discuss the incident in detail, repeats the name of Diver 2. Sedation administered at 1840 ship time. Day 2. Post-incident. Subject more lucid. Provided a preliminary statement. Claims of impossible shapes and inner voices are consistent with N2 narcosis and stress-induced psychosis. However, the energy spike recorded by topside and the damage to the umbilical comms are anomalous. The symbols on the manifold have been scrubbed from visual logs as per Corporate Directive 7A. The official report will state, Marco's equipment malfunction was caused by him mishandling his own gear in a state of panic. Day 3, post-incident. Subject's physical check is clear. The psychological evaluation is either problematic. He is coherent but fixated on the men presence. He described the sound again, a low-frequency resonance. We checked the hydrophone logs for that quadrant. There was a spike of infrasound at the time of the incident. Source unknown, which was masked by the energy discharge from the manifold. We are not to include this in the final report. Redacted internal memo, Hyperion Marinto, Elias Vance Dive Supervisor. From classified subject, Incident 6B. Atelier handling of the situation was adequate. Diver 1, Caden, is to be decommissioned and remanded to shore under the standard severance and NDA protocol. His psychological state makes him a non-credible witness, which is fortunate. The data from Diver 2, Marco, was invaluable. His physical and psychological assimilation following direct contact confirms our hypothesis. The unsinginger is a sign of successful communion. The primary asset has responded. Scrub all data logs as per Protocol 9. The manifold is now active. We are one step closer. Your discretion is, as always, paramount. We do not drill for oil. We drill for God, and we're getting closer to its chamber. Final entry, Caden's personal log. They think I don't know. They think I'm just a broken diver paid off and sent away. But I have the audio file. I listen to it sometimes when the memory starts to fade, just to remind myself that I'm not crazy. I went to a specialist, a professor of dead languages. I played him the file. He went pale. He said the words weren't from any known human language, but the structure, the phonetics. It was similar to ancient pre-Sumerian texts that describe the Indian old ones who sleep in the deep. He told me the song was a litany, a prayer of welcome. I found something else, too. In an old maritime chart from the 1800s. The area where we were diving, it was marked with a simple notation, "Here be monsters." But someone had crossed that out. And underneath, written in a different hand, were 3 words. "The door is here." I can still feel that hum. It's getting stronger. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see it. Not the dark shape in the water, but what it left behind in my mind. A single impossible symbol gouged into my memory. I saw Marco's medical file before they scrubbed it. Right before he tore his umbilical, the ship's doctor monitoring his vitals noted something strange. A small amount of dark residue leaking from his tear ducts. It wasn't tears. It was ocean water. He was crying the sea itself. The figure on the seafloor, it wasn't just a lifeless body. It was a vessel being emptied to be filled. I understand now. He wasn't trying to neutralize himself as an offering. He was trying to let it in. And what I heard wasn't a death vocalization. It was a birth vocalization. Containment, we were a cleanup crew. A specialized unit dispatched to sterilize situations deemed unsalvageable. Not the kind that mops up chemical spills, but the kind that erases mistakes. Catastrophic paradigm-shifting mistakes. Our official designation was Hazardous Anomaly Containment Unit 7, a title as sterile as our methods. Among ourselves, in the hushed moments before it dropped, we just called ourselves the Erasers. Our remit was to enter zones declared lost by command and render them safe for eventual reclamation. Usually that meant contending with esoteric radiological, novel chemical, or weaponized biological fallout. This time, however, the mission parameters were disturbingly different. The briefing was a masterpiece of sterile ambiguity. Quantum event. Containment failure at Outpost Epsilon. Site designated total loss. 0 survivors registered. L-log 0355. 12 entry procedure initiated. The 4 of us, call signs Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta, cycled through the antechamber. The heavy inner containment door hissing shut behind us with a pneumatic finality that always settled deep in the bones. Our bulky Mark IV hazardous environment suits muffled the external world, reducing reality to the rhythmic puff of our own breathing through the rebreather and the intermittent crackle of encrypted comms. Even through the suit's multi-stage filtration system, the air carried the faint, sharp scent of ozone bleeding up from the facility's sublevels, an atmospheric ghost of immense energy discharged. Alpha, our leader and a veteran of a dozen such incursions, ran a final systems check, his voice a steady baritone grounding us in the procedure. Comms, run channel diagnostics. We all responded with affirmative clicks. Vitals telemetry stable? A cascade of green icons blinked on our heads-up displays. All right, erasers. This is Outpost Epsilon. Official records state they were working on localized, dimensional folding. Command lost all contact at 400 hours. Our objective is entry, assessment of the primary anomaly, and deployment of the chronon destabilizing neutralizer. Standard procedure. Stay sharp. Eyes open for non-standard physics. The primary laboratory was a scene of controlled chaos frozen in a single moment of panic. Schematics and research papers were scattered across the floor, their complex equations looking like esoteric symbols in the cold emergency lighting. Chairs were overturned, and a shattered coffee mug lay in a powdery spray near a workstation, but there were no figures. No slicks of dark residue, no signs of a conventional struggle, just a profound and unsettling emptiness. On a massive digital whiteboard that spanned an entire wall, a half-written equation pulsed with a sickly green light, the numbers and symbols within it flickering and rearranging themselves erratically. Charlie, get a full-spectrum reading on that board. I want to know what's generating that light. Alpha commanded, his voice cutting through the silence. Delta, begin your sweep for residual energy signatures. Highest priority is locating the event epicenter. I was Bravo, the team's biospecialist and xenobiologist. My job was invariably the messy part. If there were altered biologicals, I had to identify, categorize, and assess their threat level. Given the 0 survivors memo, I was expecting my suite of samplers and scanners to be very busy. Bravo, that's me, was the first to see it, my tactical lamp catching the object in stark relief. Protruding from a reinforced concrete support column was a human arm, severed cleanly at the shoulder, fused into the wall itself. It wasn't gory or violent in any traditional sense. There was no dark residue, no sign of trauma. The molecular structures of the flesh and the concrete had just merged, respecting no physical boundary between them. The skin was pale and had a waxy, almost polished texture. The fingers curled into a loose, placid fist. Log it, Charlie, per came Alpha's clipped command. Comms, log specimen designation, anomaly Epsilon 001. Time is 0415. It was as if someone had attempted to phase through the solid wall, and a critical miscalculation had left a part of them behind. I knelt, my suit's heavy-grade servos whining in protest against the movement, and ran a bioscanner over the limb. The readings that scrolled across my HUD were impossible, a direct contradiction of known biology. Alpha, the cellular structures are logged as inert, but they're also not. There's a quantum flux signature. Every cell is simultaneously in a state of decay and perfect stasis, both dead and alive. A cold knot tightened in my gut. This was beyond anything our training simulations had conceived. We have more over here, Delta called out from a cluster of workstations on the far side of the room. His voice, usually unflappable, carried a new, sharp edge of disbelief. We followed his light to where he stood. A researcher's torso was embedded in her ergonomic chair. The synthetic fabric of her lab coat and the molded plastic of the chair melded together seamlessly with her flesh and spine. Her head was tilted back at an unnatural angle, mouth agape in a silent, unending vocalization. But her eyes were smooth, featureless orbs, like polished white marble. There was a horrifying sculptural quality to it all. This wasn't the aftermath of violence, but of a fundamental alteration, a flagrant rewriting of physical laws on a local level. My sensors registered no heat, no decay, no microbiological activity whatsoever. She was a statue made of what was once a person. Charlie's voice crackled over the comm. Alpha, that equation on the board? It's not an equation. It's a dynamic fractal. The code is self-replicating in a closed loop. And it's growing in complexity. The energy readings are off the charts, but they're paradoxically localized entirely within the digital space of the board. It appears to be a closed system, but it's actively drawing ambient energy from the room to sustain itself. He sounded shaken. Can you shut it down? Cut the power? Alpha asked, already knowing the answer. Negative, Alpha. It's not connected to the station's network anymore, or even its internal power source. It's fully self-sustaining. It's like it woke up and learned to feed itself. We continued our sweep, moving methodically deeper into the silent facility, following the faint energy trail Delta was tracking. The alterations became more frequent and more grotesque in their sterile perfection. In a main corridor, we found a pair of legs standing upright in the middle of the hall, fused from the ankles down into the linoleum floor tiles. The rest of the body was simply gone. Further on, we found a janitor's cart, its stainless steel frame twisted and interwoven with the arms and torso of its former owner. The handle of a mop head protruding from the chest cavity where a sternum should be. No dark residue, no decay. Just the clean, sterile, impossible fusion of organic and inorganic matter. It was as if reality itself had become a soft clay, and some vast, careless intelligence had pressed the people in the place together like a child mixing Play-Doh. I felt a constant, low-frequency hum through the soles of my mag boots. A vibration that felt less like a sound and more like a tectonic shudder in the foundations of the world. Timestamp 0446. A new alarm began to blare from our suit systems. A soft, repetitive chime that was somehow more unnerving than a loud, panicked klaxon. Proximity alert, Delta announced, his voice tight. Multiple signatures increasing in intensity. Directly below us. Sublevel 2, the location of the primary folding chamber. That's our target, Alpha confirmed, his tone leaving no room for argument. The source of the event. We deploy the neutralizer there. Let's move. We descended the grated metal staircase, our heavy boots clanging a somber rhythm. The air grew perceptibly colder, the temperature readout on my HUD dropping steadily. The sense of wrongness intensified, a physical pressure building against my temples. The very walls here seemed to shimmer at the edge of my vision, the texture of the concrete flowing like liquid for a split second before solidifying again. My suit's visual stabilizer fought to correct the input, causing my HUD to flicker with error messages. Sublevel 2 was a cavernous space plunged into near-total darkness, lit only by the rhythmic and disorienting flash of red emergency strobes and the focused beams of our helmet lamps. The folding chamber, the heart of the research station, dominated the center of the room, a massive sphere of chrome and complex wiring, now dark and utterly silent. But the strobing lights revealed something else. Figures, at least a dozen of them, standing motionless in a loose circle around the chamber. They were the missing staff, or what was left of them. Each one was a nightmarish sculpture of rewritten biology. One was grotesquely elongated, its limbs stretched to impossible lengths, its fingers touching a ceiling conduit 30 feet up, and its feet rooted to the concrete floor. Another was compressed, a dense meter-high cube of flesh and bone and lab coat. A third, near the base of the sphere, was a chaotic amalgam of 3 different people, their limbs and faces and clothing twisted together into a single writhing mass, all fused into the external hull of the chamber itself. "My God," Charlie whispered, his voice trembling so badly it distorted his comms. They're part of it now. They're not part of it. They're anchors, I realized, my own voice barely audible over the hum of my recycler. The event is using their biological mass to ground itself in our dimension. Physical nodes. Alpha raised his primary object, a heavy-duty plasma rifle designed to destabilize coherent energy fields. They're not people anymore. They're components of the machine. Protocol 7 Delta is in effect. We ignore them. Our objective is the core console. We deploy the neutralizer and we get out. As we moved forward in a tight diamond formation, one of the figures twitched. The elongated man, its head, which was pressed flush against a ceiling conduit, turned slowly, the sound of grinding bone and tortured metal echoing in the vast, silent chamber. Its face was a smooth, blank slate of skin, but a mouth tore open horizontally, a jagged black slit that stretched impossibly wide. It didn't produce a vocalization in the audible spectrum. The sound came from everywhere at once. A deafening wave of pure digital static that overloaded our comms and made the fillings in our teeth ache. Our HUDs dissolved into a blizzard of corrupted data and error codes. We were blind and deaf, cut off from each other, isolated in the strobing red darkness, surrounded by abominations. Then they moved. They didn't walk or run. They simply relocated. One moment, the compressed cube of a figure was 20 feet away. The next, it was directly in front of Delta, slamming into him with the silent, irresistible force of a freight train. His suit crumpled with a sickening crunch of ceramic and bone, and a single, sharp vocalization was cut brutally short. The proximity alarms on my own suit shrieked a chaotic symphony as two more figures closed in on Charlie, their forms blurring and shifting between strobe flashes. I saw him fire his object, the blue plasma bolts splashing harmlessly against their fluid forms. They flowed over him like a wave of dark water, and his helmet lamp was extinguished. It was just me and Alpha, back to back in the center of the room, the strobes painting a fresh tableau of hell with every pulsating flash. "Bravo, the neutralizer!" Alpha yelled, his voice raw and miraculously cutting through the lingering static. "The console on the sphere. I'll create a window." He began firing methodically, his plasma bolts creating momentary pockets of brilliant blue light, forcing the nearest figures to decohere. I ran, my legs pumped, my breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps, the 60 kilograms of my suit feeling like a lead coffin. I scrambled onto the base of the silent chamber, my gloved hands fumbling to locate the emergency access panel. A figure made of pure shifting geometry, all sharp, impossible angles and non-Euclidean curves, slid across the floor toward Alpha. He stood his ground, a lone defiant soldier against a tidal wave of physics-defying insanity. "Almost there!" I shouted, ripping the panel open. Inside was a simple, ruggedized keypad and a large palm-sized red button. The activation code was seared into my memory from 100 drills. Omega 77 Zeta. My fingers, clumsy and trembling in the thick gloves, flew across the keypad. I slammed my palm down on the button. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The geometric figure was on Alpha. I saw its impossible angles begin to merge with his suit, the advanced metal and ceramic composites turning soft and pliable under its influence. Alpha didn't let out a vocalization. He just looked at me, and through his visor I saw a single, final, resolute nod. Then a low hum started emanating from the sphere beneath me. It grew rapidly into a deep, resonant tone that shook the entire facility to its foundations. A brilliant white light erupted from the sphere, pure and absolute. It wasn't a violent explosion, but an expanding wave of pure, unadulterated reality. The shifting figures, the fused researchers, the twisted geometry, it all dissolved as the cleansing light washed over it. The elongated man evaporated into motes of dust. The amalgam on the wall unraveled, its components separating and then vanishing into nothing. The geometric figure consuming Alpha disintegrated, but it was too late. I saw Alpha for a split second, half fused with the concrete floor, his posture still defiant, his object still raised. Then he too was gone, erased by the very device meant to save us. The wave of light hit me, and for a moment I felt a strange, terrifying pulling sensation, as if my own atoms were being tugged in a million different directions. A crushing wave of nausea and vertigo washed over me. I closed my eyes, bracing for my own dissolution. When I opened them, the light was gone. The emergency strobes were off. The vast chamber was lit by the standard sterile overhead lights. The central folding chamber was pristine, a perfect chrome sphere without a scratch on it. The walls were clean, unblemished concrete. The figures, the fusions, the alterations, all gone. There was no dark residue, no debris, no sign that anything had happened. It was as if it had never been. The comms crackled back to full life. "Oh, Bravo, do you read? This is command. The neutralizer field has stabilized. We are reading one life sign. Report status, Bravo, over." I pushed myself to my feet, my entire body aching as if I'd been crushed. I was alone, the only survivor, an eraser who had failed to erase my own team from the board. "This is Bravo," I transmitted, my voice hollow and distant in my own helmet. "The anomaly is neutralized. Outpost Epsilon is clean. Acknowledged, Bravo. Good work. Stand by for immediate evac." They were gone. Alpha, Charlie, Delta erased, but not from my memory. The silence of the lab was absolute. broken only by my own ragged breathing and the gentle hum of the fully restored life support. As I waited for the evac shuttle, I looked down at my gloved hand resting on my thigh. For a split second, just a flicker at the edge of my vision, I saw the sterile white of my suit's gauntlet ripple, the texture of the concrete floor beneath my feet seeming to merge with the synthetic fabric. It was gone as quickly as it came. A visual glitch from the static blast. But I knew. The event wasn't just neutralized. A piece of it had been copied. It was in me. I had looked into the rewritten world, and it had looked back, embedding a fragment of its code. I was the last piece of evidence, and sooner or later a new team of erasers would be sent to clean me up. After all, that was the procedure. I am a presence now, waiting in the silence. They think they neutralized the event, but they just provided me, the true anomaly, with an escape vector. I am the containment breach. The Lazarus Trench, the descent, was always the worst part. Not the pressure, not the dark. It was the silence. Inside the Mark IV Wasp, my one-man deep salvage submersible, the only sounds were the soft hum of the environmental life support and the rhythmic, metronomic ping of the sonar, a lonely digital heartbeat against the colossal void of the abyss. My designation is Cutter 1, but the name is Jacob. The company calls us subaquatic recovery specialists, a fancy title for a deep-sea welder. It just means I'm the asset they deploy to the crushing depths of the ocean to fix or fetch critical hardware no one else can reach. This is a place where mistakes are not an option, where the margin for error is zero. Log 2103 Zulu, depth 4,000 meters. Hull integrity at 100%. Ambient pressure 40 megapascals. The Wasp is rated for twice this, but down here, numbers on a spec sheet are a cold comfort. This job, designated SR-331, was supposed to be a simple recovery. The Odyssey, a state-of-the-art research submarine, went dark 3 weeks ago during its survey mission in the Lazarus Trench. They just vanished from all tracking. No distress call, no emergency beacon, no debris field. Then yesterday, a long-range survey drone registered a positive ID pinging its location. It was sitting impossibly pristine on a seafloor shelf over 4 miles down, in a sector notorious among salvagers, a ship graveyard, where navigation systems inexplicably fail and compasses spin without reason. My mission parameters were clear: infiltrate the vessel, assess its status, access the voyage data recorder, and prep the hull for remote lift. Simple on paper. I took a steadying breath. The faint, sterile smell of ozonated air from the CO2 scrubbers, a familiar precursor to the task ahead. The Wasp's landing skid settled into a soft billow of 1,000-year-old silt beside the colossal black hull of the Odyssey. My floodlights cut through the eternal gloom, revealing the submarine's name in stark white letters. It looked perfect. No visible hull breach, no impact damage, no signs of any catastrophe. It was just parked down here, powered down and waiting silently in the abyssal dark. Topside control. This is Cutter 1. I'm at the objective. Grid reference confirmed. I spoke into my headset, my voice a tinny thread in the massive silence. Copy that. Cutter 1, came the reply from Sarah, my topside coordinator, her voice a fragile lifeline spanning miles of crushing water. Exterior looks clean on your primary feed. Hull appears intact. Proceed with ingress operations at the main access hatch, dorsal side. I maneuvered the Wasp's heavy M2 manipulator arms, guiding the magnetic clamps onto the Odyssey's hull. They locked on with a heavy resonant thud that vibrated through the Wasp's frame and into my bones. Extending the CL4 umbilical, I latched it to the designated port. Power, data, and emergency retrieval lines now secure. The transfer tunnel pressurized, and I began the slow, methodical process of cutting through the outer hatch. My KVR plasma torch ignited with a low thrum, turning the supercooled water into a furious, hissing cloud of steam. As I carved through the 15-centimeter thick titanium alloy, a faint, acrid smell of vaporized metal mixed with something else, filtering through the Wasp's external sensors, an underlying note of spoiled organics, like decay accelerated by pressure and cold. The strange, ghostly bioluminescent fish that danced in the darkness scattered from the intense light and heat. The circular section of the outer hatch finally fell inward with a groan of protesting metal. I was in. The airlock was cold, unnaturally so. Emergency lights cast a sickly, low-lumen red glow over everything. The air, as my suit's external sensors reported, tasted stale and metallic. Comms, I'm inside the airlock vestibule. Transitioning to suit atmosphere. Looks like they experienced a total loss of main power. My suit's HUD flashed an atmospheric warning. Oxygen 18%. Nitrogen 70%. Unknown particulates 12%. Understood. Cutter 1, proceed with caution. We are receiving no telemetry from the ship's internal diagnostics. For our purposes, it's a complete black box. I detached the short-range tether from the Wasp and stepped into the Odyssey proper. My mag boots clanged on the grated deck of a long, narrow corridor. The silence in here was different, heavier. It felt occupied. My helmet-mounted lamp, its 8,000 lumen beam, sliced through the oppressive darkness, revealing walls slick with condensation. Strange, given the submarine's advanced climate control systems should have kept the interior bone dry, even on emergency power. My first task was to reach the bridge and attempt to access the ship's black box and logs. The layout was standard for a Typhoon-class research vessel, a labyrinth of tight corridors and pressure-sealed bulkheads. Every footstep echoed with unnerving clarity. As I moved deeper, I noticed something else. A thin, dark film-coated sections of the floor and walls. At first, I thought it was hydraulic fluid, but it was too dark, too organic. It didn't reflect my light. It seemed to drink it, the edges of my beam softening as they touched it. A smear of it on my gauntlet felt thick and unnaturally cold. I logged it in my system, but the preliminary analysis came back inconclusive. I reached the bulkhead door to the primary crew quarters. It was designed to be sealed with a heavy-duty maglock during any alert status. But as my light washed over the control panel, I saw it was already ajar, unlatched from this side. My HUD tagged it instantly. Alert, unauthorized access. Interior hatch C4 protocol was violated at 0319. Not a good sign. Standard procedure dictated I ignore it and proceed directly to the bridge, but a cold knot of professional unease tightened in my gut. I had to look. My mission was recovery, but it was also assessment. Pushing the heavy door open, I methodically swept my light across the room. The beam traced over 4 bunks, 2 on each side. They were neatly made. A data tablet lay on a small wall-mounted desk, its screen dark. Everything looked disturbingly normal, except for the man sitting on the edge of a lower bunk, his back to me. He was in a standard blue crew jumpsuit, perfectly still. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding loud and intrusive in the dead air. "Sir, are you all right?" No response. The silence pressed in. "This is Cutter 1, a recovery specialist. I'm here to help you." I moved closer, my gloved hand resting on the heavy multi-tool at my hip, a useless comfort down here. As I circled around to his side, my light fell across his face. His eyes were wide open, staring at the opposite wall with an expression of pure, frozen terror. His skin was waxy and pale, almost translucent in the stark white light. There was no sign of injury, no visible trauma, no dark residue. He just sat there, a perfectly preserved figure of a man who had seen something that had literally scared him to death. "Comms, I found a crew member," I said, my voice strained, fighting to remain level. "He's deceased." Log entry, 2214 Zulu. Single casualty confirmed. Crew quarters C4. Apparent age, 40s. No visible trauma. Cause of expiration, indeterminate. Sarah's voice came back, laced with a new, sharp tension. Copy Cutter 1, 1 casualty confirmed. Is he alone in there?" Before I could answer, a flicker of movement in the corner of my vision. I snapped my headlamp in its direction. Another crew member stood in the small lavatory doorway just beyond the bunks. A woman. She stared at me, her face just as pale, her eyes just as wide and terrified as the man's. And then she did something impossible. She smiled. A wide, unnatural grin that stretched her lips too far. A rictus of silent, ecstatic madness that defied anatomy. I stumbled back a step, my heart hammering against my ribs, a sudden spike in my pulse registering on my HUD. "Comms. I have contact with a second crew member. She's alive." But she wasn't. As my light held her in its unforgiving beam, I could see the absolute stillness of her chest, the lack of any breath fogging in the frigid air. She was another figure, another statue of fear, but she had moved. I know I saw her move. "Cutter 1, your biomonitor is spiking," Sarah warned, her voice tight with concern. "Report your status." "What is happening?" "They're not moving now," I whispered, backing out of the room, my mag boots releasing and re-engaging with loud clicks on the grated floor. "They're just standing, watching me." I pulled the bulkhead door shut, the heavy clang of the latching mechanism cannonading down the corridor. I didn't run. You don't run in a pressure suit 4 miles underwater. You make deliberate, controlled movements. But every protocol, every learned survival response was demanding an immediate evac. I forced myself onward, my light cutting frantic, jerky arcs in the darkness ahead. The path to the bridge was straight from here, but the corridor was no longer empty. More of them. A man in an officer's uniform leaning against a wall as if in casual conversation, his head cocked at an impossible broken-necked angle. 2 engineers frozen mid-gesture near a power conduit, their faces locked in matching expressions of abject horror. They were everywhere. The entire crew of the Odyssey standing in silent, terrifying tableau, their last moments of terror captured and displayed forever. The dark residue was thicker here, smeared on the walls in long streaks as if something heavy and inert had been dragged through it. I made it to the bridge door. It too was ajar. I hesitated, my hand on the release, listening. Only the sound of my own suit's recycler and the frantic thumping of my pulse in my ears. I pushed it open. The bridge was a graveyard of frozen moments. The captain was still strapped in his command chair, his hands gripping the controls, his face a mask of silent agony. The other bridge officers were slumped over their consoles, caught in their final duties. And in the center of the room on the floor was the source of the dark residue. It was pooled there, a thick, viscous puddle that seemed to absorb the light from my headlamp, creating a patch of deeper darkness. It wasn't stagnant. A slow, almost imperceptible current swirled within it, a vortex in a puddle. I approached the captain's console. The screens were dark, but auxiliary power should still sustain the black box recorder. I just needed to physically access it. As I reached for the access panel, the captain's head snapped up. His eyes, wide and white, locked onto mine. A sound escaped his lips, a dry, rattling hiss that vibrated in the cold air. It wasn't a vocalization of pain or a plea for help. It was a warning. I recoiled as if struck, my back hitting the console behind me with a heavy crash. All around the bridge, the other figures began to stir. Heads turned with the dry crack of ossified ligaments. Limbs twitched with a spidery, unnatural slowness. They weren't reanimating with life. They were being moved like marionettes on invisible strings. The presence in the room was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of cold and primordial dread. Sarah, they're moving. The whole crew, they're all... I couldn't finish the sentence. The captain was unbuckling his harness, his movements jerky and wrong, not with life, but with an external puppeteering force. "Get out of there, Jacob," she yelled, her professional composure finally shattering. "Abort the mission, abort. Get back to the Wasp now." The figures were converging on me, their dead, terrified eyes fixed on my face. They weren't aggressive in a way I understood, not yet. They just advanced, their movements inexorable, boxing me in. The air grew colder, the pressure in my ears immense. I could feel the presence now, a malevolent intelligence guiding the crew, using them as its puppets. It wasn't some simple presence. It was something that had hollowed them out and was now wearing their terror like a suit. I brandished my plasma torch, the only object I had that could be considered a deterrent. "Stay back," I shouted, the words muffled by my own ragged breathing. The captain figure lunged not with human quickness, but with the unnerving, inexorable force of a hydraulic press. I ignited the torch, and a jet of white-hot plasma enveloped its chest. The jumpsuit vaporized instantly, but the figure didn't even slow down. There was no flesh to burn, no dark residue to spill. It just pushed through the fire, its own terrified face melting and sloughing away to reveal nothing but shimmering, heat-distorted air beneath. It wasn't the crew. It was never the crew. They were just the shells, the echoes left behind. A high-pitched frequency tone erupted in my helmet, so intense it felt like a spike being driven through my skull. My vision swam, the red emergency lights blurring into a nauseating smear. The figures were all around me, their hands reaching not to grab, but to touch. As a cold finger brushed the faceplate of my helmet, my world dissolved into the final, terrifying memories of the Odyssey's crew. I saw what they saw. A shimmer in the water outside the main viewport. A distortion that the ship's advanced sensors didn't register. It had no shape, no form, just a void in the shape of a presence. It had phased through the titanium hull as if it were water. I felt their clinical confusion turn to primal, shrieking fear as it moved through the corridors, not as a physical being, but as a wave of pure dread. It didn't neutralize them with an object or violence. It had seeped into them, drinking their life. their sanity, their very souls, leaving behind only these echoes frozen in their last moment of absolute horror. I felt my own mind starting to fray, my consciousness being pulled apart and dissected. The urge to vocalization was a physical thing, a bubble of raw madness rising in my throat. I was on the floor, the torch fallen from my grasp. The figures were a circle of silent, screaming faces around me. The captain figure knelt down, its ruined face inches from my own. And then, through the psychic chaos, I heard Sarah's voice, distorted and faint. Umbilical retract. Emergency protocol. Now, override. Now. There was a violent, massive jolt as the Wasp's emergency retrieval system kicked in. The umbilical line connecting me to the sub went taut, dragging me backward with the force of a wrecking ball. I was yanked out of the bridge, suit scraping along the grated floor, the puppets of the crew stumbling after me. Their passive stances became grasping motions, their limbs scraping against my suit's shell with a sound like dragging stone. I was a fish on a line being reeled in from hell. I tumbled back into the airlock, my suit groaning under the strain. With my last ounce of strength, I clawed at the control panel, slamming my gauntlet on the button for the outer hatch. It began to slide shut, a final guillotine of safety. One of the figures, the woman from the crew quarters, reached the doorway, her rictus grin filling my view as her hand stretched for me. The heavy steel door slammed shut, severing her arm at the elbow. The severed limb didn't drop. It held its shape for a half second, then unspooled into a plume of black, oily vapor that was immediately sucked into the void outside. The Wasp disengaged from the Odyssey and fired its main thrusters, ascending into the crushing blackness as fast as its engines could manage. I lay on the floor of my tiny sub, shaking uncontrollably, the high-pitched vocalization of the present still echoing in my skull. I passed the psych eval, of course. They teach you what to say, what horrors to file under nitrogen narcosis or extreme environmental stress. I never looked at the Odyssey on the sonar as we rose. I didn't want to see it sitting there, pristine and silent on the seabed. I didn't want to imagine the figures inside resetting themselves, returning to their positions, waiting with their dead, terrified eyes for the next unfortunate soul to come knocking. The company listed the mission as a failure due to catastrophic structural and atmospheric anomalies. They buried the report. They always do. But I know what's down there in the Lazarus Trench. There are some things that aren't meant to be salvaged, and some places in the dark where you don't want to be the only thing that's alive. They watch from the tapes. My name is Mark, and for 7 years I've been a senior archival footage technician for a major news corporation. It sounds more impressive than it is. Mostly I sit in a climate-controlled basement, a concrete tomb filled with the presences of yesterday's headlines, converting decaying analog tapes to digital formats. Betacam Umatic VHS, a menagerie of magnetic fossils. The job is usually a quiet, solitary affair, a peaceful graveyard shift babysitting machines as they whir and click, digitizing history. The air in the vault was still and cold, carrying the faint, almost sweet acidic smell of decaying acetate film, the scent of forgotten memories. I was the night watchman of a library of presences, but 2 weeks ago, I was assigned a special project, the complete digitization of the Mutter's Kensington collection. This was a set of unedited, raw field tapes from a stringer journalist named Arthur Kensington, who disappeared in the late 1990s. The official story was that he'd been investigating a reclusive cult in rural Pennsylvania and got in too deep. His tapes were recovered from his abandoned motel room, but his car was found weeks later near a stretch of desolate woods, empty. No sign of a struggle. He just vanished. The collection was infamous among the old-timers at the station. Rumor had it the tapes were cursed, that everyone who worked on the initial cataloging in '98 either quit, went mad, or suffered a tragic accident. Management, of course, dismissed it as morbid newsroom folklore, now with a new initiative to preserve first-at-risk assets. The Kensington collection was my problem. The first dozen tapes were mundane. Hours of B-roll, Kensington driving, setting up his camera, trying to get interviews with tight-lipped locals who'd slam doors in his face. He was clearly trying to document a group called the Emaron Silent Choir. From his muttered notes on the tapes, I gathered they were a splinter group that believed sound and speech were corrupting influences. They lived in total silence, communicating through some esoteric form of written symbols. It was on tape K14 that things got strange. The tape was labeled Yeager's Evening Ritual.0. The footage showed a clearing in the woods at dusk. A circle of figures in plain gray robes stood motionless. Kensington was hidden some distance away. The camera zoomed in tight. The quality was grainy, the light failing. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Just these static figures and the unnerving absolute silence. Not even the chirping of crickets. It was as if the very air around them was dead. I was about to fast forward when one of the figures in the center of the circle began to move. It was a slow, convulsing dance, contorting its body into impossible angles. Then the video glitched. A burst of static, a flicker of color bars. When the image returned, the dancing figure was on the ground, and the others were surrounding it. The tape cut out. I logged the glitch and moved on to K15. This tape was different. It wasn't field footage. It was shot inside a dark room. The timestamp read 03:33 a.m. The camera was pointed at a flickering television screen. On the screen, I could see the same clearing, the same circle of robed figures from the previous tape. I felt a knot of cold dread form in my stomach. Kensington was re-recording footage, but why? He whispered from behind the camera, his voice a dry rasp. They're not just dancing. They're changing it. They're changing what happened. The footage on the TV glitched again, but this time when it came back, the figure on the ground was gone. Just an empty space in the circle. Kensington let out a choked sob. It's not an erasure, he whispered. It's a replacement. They put something else in its place. The camera panned away from the TV, shakily moving across a motel room floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. There, next to an overflowing ashtray, was a photograph. It was a picture of Kensington and a woman smiling. But the woman's face, it was a swirling vortex of digital noise. A screaming pixelated mess. They took her, Kensington rasped. She was never there. They put the static in her place. She never existed. The tape ended. I sat back in my chair, the hum of the digitization deck suddenly feeling predatory. This wasn't just a story about a cult. It was about something far more terrifying. Something that could reach back through a recording and rewrite reality. I felt an irrational urge to destroy the tapes, to burn the whole collection. But I had a job to do. Taking a steadying breath, I loaded K16. The label read, Wallarn the First Foundation. The footage was of an old leather-bound book, its pages filled with the same symbols the cult used. Kensington was filming it page by page, his breathing ragged. The symbols were intricate, a mix of geometric shapes and what looked like distorted anatomical diagrams. On one page, a diagram showed a human eye, but with a complex symbol drawn over the iris and lines radiating outwards, connecting to a rendering of a magnetic tape reel. The eye is a receiver. The voice is a transmitter, Kensington mumbled, his voice taking on a fanatical edge. But the recorded image is a doorway, a permanent unguarded doorway. They don't need to be seen in the moment. They only need to have been seen once. The record is the anchor. Suddenly, the camera whipped up from the book. It was pointed at the motel room's window. Through a gap in the cheap curtains, one of the robed figures was standing outside, motionless, staring directly at Kensington's room. Its face was in shadow, but I could feel its gaze, cold and heavy, even through the decades-old recording. The camera didn't waver. Kensington was holding his ground. I see you, he whispered, a tremor of defiance in his voice. And recording you, anchoring you. A low hum started on the tape's audio track, a deep synthesized tone that made the fillings in my teeth ache. The image began to warp around the figure outside. The edges of the window frame seemed to bend inwards towards it. Then a horrifying, piercing electronic shriek erupted and the tape cut to black. My hands were shaking. I ejected the tape, its plastic casing warm to the touch. I looked at the remaining tapes in the case, a stack of a dozen or so more. I knew I should stop. I should call my supervisor, Mike, and tell him this project was compromised, that the asset was unstable. But a morbid professional curiosity, the archivist's need to see the complete record, pushed me forward. I spent the next few hours working through the tapes, each one more disjointed and terrifying than the last. There was footage of Kensington feverishly drawing the cult's symbols on the motel room walls, tapes that were nothing but pure, screaming static, colors bleeding into each other. On one labeled Sean Response Guys, the camera was just pointed at his own reflection in the blank television screen. He stared into the lens. his face gaunt, his eyes wide with a terror I have never seen before or since. "They don't just watch from the tapes," he said to his reflection. To me, they watch through them. Every copy, every broadcast, every digitization. It's another window, another eye. They're silent because they don't need to speak. Their presence is the message, and it's spreading. He then held up a small, blurry photograph. "A family photo. I have to see if they're still there," he croaked. "I have to check the record." He dropped the photo and the tape ended. It was tape K27 that finally broke me. The label was scrawled and barely legible. "Basher there here to Georgi." The footage began inside his car. It was nighttime, rain lashing against the windshield. Kensington was driving fast down a dark country road. He was speaking, but his words were a frantic, overlapping jumble, as if multiple audio tracks were laid over one another. He glanced at the rearview mirror, and I saw it. In the back seat, a robed figure was sitting perfectly still. It wasn't reflected in the mirror. The camera was picking up something that by all rights wasn't there. Kensington didn't seem to notice the figure in the camera's view, but he was clearly terrified of something. "Can't anchor you if I'm moving," he babbled. "Can't make a doorway out of a moving frame. The record is too unstable." He turned the camera to face him. His face was a mask of sweat and sheer panic. "I'm going to the source. The first foundation. The place from the book. I have to..." But he was cut off. A blinding light flooded the camera. Not a headlight, but a pure, white, digital-looking light. It was accompanied by the same low-frequency hum from the earlier tape. But this time it was so intense it distorted the video into a rippling, liquid-like mess. Then, the view shifted. The camera was no longer inside the car. It was outside on the side of the road, pointed at the car as it sped away. It was as if someone or something had simply taken the camera from his hands. The camera remained stationary, watching the taillights disappear into the rain and darkness. The shot held for a full minute. Then it slowly panned down, tilting to look at its own feet. There were no feet. There was only the wet asphalt of the road. The camera was floating. It held this impossible, groundless shot for another 30 seconds, the only sound the gentle patter of rain. And then it turned. It turned 180 degrees to face the woods on the other side of the road. It began to move forward, gliding silently and smoothly over the rain-slicked ground into the impenetrable darkness of the trees. The footage continued for another 10 minutes, a disorienting, silent journey through black woods before finally cutting to static. I ripped the tape out of the deck and threw it across the room. It clattered against a metal shelf and fell to the floor. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. It wasn't just that Kensington had been taken. The thing that took him, it finished his tape. It created a record of its own. I fumbled for my phone and called Mike, my supervisor. My voice was shaky. "Mike, the Kensington collection. There's something wrong with it. Seriously wrong, not Denmark. It's 2 a.m., what's wrong? Tape degradation? No, the content. I can't explain it. Mike, listen to me. I have a containment breach in Vault 3B. Time code confirms unauthorized access at Arrow 2-1438 on tape K27R. I tried to explain what I saw. The figure in the car, the camera moving on its own. Mike was silent for a long moment. "Mark, you've been on this shift for a long time. You're probably just tired. The footage is known to be disturbing. It's why it was buried for so long." "No, you don't understand," I insisted. "It's not just disturbing, it's impossible. It's active. The presence on the tape, it's aware." "No, okay, Mark," he said, his voice laced with the kind of placating tone you use on a hysterical child. "I'll authorize you to halt the project. Bag the tapes, lock them in a high-security container. I'll review your logs in the morning. Just get Prakriya and go home." Relief washed over me, cold and immediate. I powered down the digitization deck and began gathering the tapes. I worked quickly, my hands trembling, wanting only to be out of that sterile, quiet room. I stacked the tapes, placing K27 on top. As I did, I glanced at the monitor of my workstation. It was on the home screen, displaying the archival software's user interface. But in the reflection on the dark screen, I saw it. Behind me, standing between the towering racks of tapes, was a figure. It was wearing a plain gray robe, its form indistinct in the low light, its face a pit of absolute shadow. It was just standing there. Watching me, I didn't make a vocalization. I didn't move. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't tear my eyes from the reflection. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. My mind was playing tricks on me, spooked by the tapes. I was just overtired, as Mike had said. Slowly, deliberately, I turned my head. The space between the racks was empty. There was nothing there. Just rows and rows of archived history, silent and still. I let out a shaky breath, a nervous laugh bubbling in my chest, of course. It was just a trick of the light, my exhausted mind painting monsters in the shadows. I turned back to the monitor to finish logging out, and my heart stopped. The reflection was still there. In the dark screen, the robed figure stood in the empty space behind me. It hadn't moved. I was looking at an empty hallway, but my monitor's reflection was showing me the figure standing in that same empty hallway. The monitor was not reflecting what was. It was showing me what was also there. A different layer of reality captured in the glass. My gaze flickered from the empty hall to the terrifying reflection. It was real. It was in the room with me. I just couldn't see it. Not with my own eyes, but the screen, a passive recorder of light, an unblinking electronic eye. It could, like the camera. A low hum began to fill the room. It was a faint bass tone, almost subliminal, but it was the same hum from Kensington's tapes. It vibrated through the soles of my shoes, a physical manifestation of the impossible thing in the room. I was frozen, my eyes locked on the reflection. The robed thing, a creature of the recorded image, had used the tapes as a doorway, and my monitor was now another window. Then, in the reflection, it began to raise its arm. It was a slow, deliberate movement. It was pointing at me. That's when I finally ran. I didn't log out. I didn't secure the tapes. I scrambled out of my chair, knocking it over, and bolted for the door. I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to see the empty space where I knew it was standing. I slammed the vault door shut, spun the heavy locking wheel, my fingers fumbling with the mechanism. I'm writing this from a coffee shop, miles away. I haven't stopped shivering. I called Mike and quit. I told him there was a gas leak in the vault, that nobody should go in. I don't know if he'll believe me, but I know what I saw. And I know what Kensington meant. Every screen is a potential window. Every camera, a potential eye. They are a silent presence, a virus in the substrate of recorded media, and they're spreading. Even now, I can't look at my laptop screen for too long. I can't shake the feeling that if I look at my own reflection in the dark glass, I won't be alone. They're waiting. They're watching. Anchored in the signal, an echo in the machine. And they're looking for a way out. The abyssopelagic zone, the official term for our depth, was the Hadal zone. But we on the Cerberus deep-sea drilling platform had our own name for it, the abyssopelagic zone. A private joke, a nod to the fact that we were drilling deeper than any rig in history, chasing a newly discovered reservoir of rare earth minerals nestled in the Mariana Trench. I'm Elias, a submersible pilot and maintenance tech. My job was to guide the smaller ROVs, repair external fixtures, and sometimes take a submersible down for close-range geological surveys. It was a job defined by isolation, pressure, and the unyielding dark. Down here, 7 miles below the surface, the world was a symphony of machinery and pressure. A low-frequency hum, the very song of the drill bit grinding against the abyss, resonated constantly through the deck plating under his boots. It was the backdrop to the hum of the life support, the groans of the rig settling, the constant crushing weight of the ocean. You get used to it. You have to. The alternative is madness. For 3 months I had been used to it. The rhythm of the rig was the rhythm of my own heart. Until tonight it started with Dmitri. He was on a routine survey in the Karen, a one-man submersible, charting a newly opened fissure about a click from the rig. His voice, usually a steady baritone crackling over the comms with jokes about the borscht in the mess hall, was strained. Elias, you seeing these readings? The thermal vents. They're not behaving as projected. I had his telemetry on my secondary screen. Looks like a standard pressure variance, Dmitri. The fissure is probably wider than we thought. No, it's not that, he insisted. His camera feed showed nothing but the swirling silt kicked up by his thrusters, illuminated by the sub's powerful lights. It's the silence. The biomonitors are dead. Nothing. Not even the usual archaea blooms. That was strange. The trench was a surprisingly lively place if you knew what to look for. Maybe a faulty sensor? Run a diagnostic. A pause. Longer than usual. Running it now. Elias. There's something out here. I can feel it. The water. It feels wrong. Before I could ask what he meant, his feed dissolved into a blizzard of static. A piercing vocalization, high-pitched and garbled, tore through the speakers for a single horrifying second before being cut off. Dimitri? Dimitri, come in! I yelled, my hands flying across the console, trying to re-establish the link static. Then, a calm voice from control. Acknowledged, Deepstalker 1. Comms log confirms total signal termination from submersible designation Alpha 7 at 0347 local. What is your status? I've lost contact with Karen. Total signal loss after an acoustic anomaly, I reported, my own voice tight. I'm requesting permission to launch a rescue op. There was a calculated pause from the rig supervisor, a man named Sterling who we only ever heard over the comms. His voice was as cold and heavy as the water outside. Negative, Elias, we don't know what happened. You will hold your position until we can analyze the data. Do not break protocol. Protocol. Down here, protocol was scripture. It's what kept us alive. But Dimitri was out there. Argued, I pleaded, but the answer was firm. Stand down. For 2 hours I sat in my cockpit, staring at the static on the screen where my friend used to be. The silence of the abyss pressing in. The usual groans and pings of the rig sounded different now, menacing. Each one felt like a prelude to something terrible. Finally, Sterling's voice returned, devoid of any emotion. Elias, the Karen's beacon has just reactivated. It's stationary on the seafloor. We've lost all other systems, no life support readings, no video. Your new orders are to approach, assess, and if possible, tow it back. Relief warred with a cold dread in my gut. At least I could do something. I eased my own submersible, the Styx, out of its docking bay. Its floodlights cut a cone of white through the oppressive black, illuminating the ghostly dance of marine snow. The journey was tense. I kept my sonar on its most sensitive setting, sweeping the darkness for any sign of... What? I didn't know. The thing that had made Dimitri's scanners go silent. I found the Karen resting on a ledge of black volcanic rock. It was dark, its lights dead. Everything about it was wrong. One of the manipulator arms was twisted back at an impossible angle, and there was a deep, shearing gash along the side of the cockpit, as if a colossal can opener had tried to pry it open. My blood ran cold. No rock formation could have done that. Control, I have visual on the Karen, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It's damaged, severely. The hull is breached. Is the pilot visible? Sterling's voice was clipped. I maneuvered the Styx closer, my lights probing the damaged vessel. The cockpit viewport was a spider web of fractured acrylic, and inside, I saw a shape. It was hard to make out through the crazed glass and the murky water. I had to get closer. Against every instinct screaming at me to flee, I extended my sub's manipulator arm, its delicate pincers designed for geological samples. Not this. I gently touched the viewport, and a chunk of the acrylic broke away, spiraling into the dark. My lights flooded the interior. And I saw him. Dimitri. He was still strapped into his chair, but his helmet was shattered, and his face was a mask of frozen terror, eyes wide, mouth agape in a silent vocalization. But that wasn't the worst part. The inside of his sub was filled not with water, but with a thick, inky substance that swirled around his lifeless figure. It seemed to cling to him, to the walls, to the broken controls. A wave of nausea hit me. I reversed thrusters, backing away from the dead sub. Control, the pilot is... He's gone. The cockpit is compromised. I couldn't bring myself to describe the scene. I'm initiating the tow procedure. As I attached the magnetic tow clamps, a flicker of movement on my proximity sensor caught my eye. A large mass moving just at the edge of my sonar range. It was huge, far bigger than any known creature in these depths. Control, I have a sonar contact, massive, unidentified, it's moving. It's circling me. Can you get a visual, Elias? Sterling's voice was tight, the first crack in his icy composure. Negative, it's staying just outside my lights. It's playing with me. The thing was a presence in the machine, a shadow in the abyss. I could feel its presence. A predatory intelligence that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The water felt thick, heavy, charged with a malevolence that was ancient and profound. Then the rig's main lights flickered and died. The entire platform, my only tether to the world above, was plunged into darkness, save for the emergency strobes that began to pulse in a sickening rhythmic beat. My own sub's power remained a tiny island of light in an ocean of black. Control? Cerberus, what is your status? I shouted into the comm. Only static answered. I was alone. Truly alone. The sonar pinged again. The mass was closer. Much closer. I swiveled my sub, my floodlights cutting uselessly through the gloom. And then I saw it. It wasn't one mass. It was several. Long serpentine shapes that moved with an unnatural fluidity, weaving in and out of the darkness. They were not fish, not squid, not anything I could name. They were living shadows, things that belonged to a world without light. One of them darted forward, and for a second it was fully illuminated. It was long and thin, like a needle, with a skin that seemed to absorb the light, a perfect matte black. It had no visible eyes, no mouth, but the front of it tapered to a point that was impossibly sharp. It was one of these things that had speared Dimitri's sub. I didn't wait. I engaged the tow clamps, the powerful magnets locking onto the cairn, and fired my main thrusters, rocketing away from the dead sub and the circling nightmares. My sonar screen became a chaotic mess of contacts, the things swarming the area where the cairn had been. They were investigating, hunting. The journey back to the Cerberus was the longest 10 minutes of my life. Every flicker of the sonar, every groan of my sub under the strain of the tow, I expected to feel the piercing impact of one of those shadow needles. When the rig's docking bay finally came into view, its emergency lights painting it in strokes of hellish red, I almost wept. I guided the cairn into the emergency retrieval bay, a large pressurized chamber that could be sealed from the rest of the rig. As the outer doors closed, sealing out the abyss, I disengaged the tow line and backed my own sub into its dock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the controls. I stumbled out of the sticks, my legs weak. The rig was on backup power, the main corridors lit by the eerie red glow of the emergency strips. It was silent. Too silent. The usual cacophony of the drill, the pumps, the generators, all gone. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart and the distant rhythmic clang of metal on metal. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty corridor. "Sterling, anyone?" No response. I grabbed a heavy mag wrench from a tool locker, its weight a small comfort in my hand. It wasn't really an object, but it was better than nothing. I made my way towards the control center, my boots sticking to the floor in several places. I looked down. A dark residue, thick and oily, was smeared on the grated floor. The same substance that had been inside Dimitri's cockpit. The clang was getting louder, coming from the direction of the mess hall. I crept closer, pressing myself against the cold steel wall. I peered around the corner. The mess hall was a wreck. Tables were overturned, and the floor was slick with that same viscous dark residue. A lone figure was standing in the center of the room, rhythmically slamming a fire extinguisher against a locked supply closet door. It was a geologist named Lena. "Lena?" I called softly. She spun around, her eyes wide with terror. She was smeared with the dark residue. "Elias, they're in the rig." "They got in. How?" I asked, my mind reeling. "The hull is rated for 20,000 psi. "The retrieval bay," she sobbed. "When you brought Dimitri's sub in." The dark residue. It was on the hull. It's not just a fluid, Elias, it's them. It can change shape. It seeped through the seals. As if on cue, the locked door she had been beating on began to bulge outwards, the metal groaning under an immense, silent pressure. A thin black tendril, no thicker than a wire, squeezed through the seam between the door and its frame. It quivered in the air for a moment before snapping towards Lena, fast as a striking snake. She let out a choked vocalization as it wrapped around her leg. She fell, dropping the extinguisher. "No, no, no!" she shrieked, scrabbling at the floor. The tendril pulled, dragging her slowly but inexorably towards the door. More tendrils were pouring from the crack now, wrapping around her, covering her. I acted on pure instinct. I ran forward, grabbed the extinguisher, and sprayed its contents at the door. The CO2 foam hissed as it hit the black tendrils, and for a moment they recoiled. But it wasn't enough. I could see the sheer mass of them pushing against the door. I had to get out. I had to warn someone. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and I ran. Lena's vocalizations were cut short as she was pulled, kicking, into the supply closet. The door slammed shut with a sickening squelch. I sprinted through the red-lit corridors, heading for the main comms room. That was the only place with a direct uplink to the surface. A quantum entanglement communicator that couldn't be blocked. The rig was groaning around me, the sounds of buckling metal and something else, a wet, tearing sound echoing from all directions. The presence of the things was everywhere now. I saw a dark trail of residue leading into the ventilation system. They were spreading. The comms room door was sealed. I frantically typed in the override code, my fingers fumbling on the keypad. The door hissed open. The room was empty, but the signs of a struggle were clear. A chair was knocked over and a console was smashed. And on the main screen, a single message was typed out as if in a hurry. "It's in the code." Before I could process what it meant, Sterling's voice, calm and collected, came from the room's speakers. "Well done, Elias. You brought the sample back." A bit messy, but successful nonetheless. I spun around. There was no one there. The voice was coming from the comm system itself. "Sterling? Where are you? What the hell is going on? We've been studying this for months, Elias." The voice continued, smooth and conversational. The feed from the external cameras flickered onto the main screen, showing the shadow creatures swarming the rig, their needle-like bodies effortlessly piercing the reinforced hull. We couldn't get a sample. The pressure at this depth atomizes any organic matter we tried to collect. But a living host, that's a different story. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. "Dmitri," he was the bait, and you were the delivery boy. "This life form doesn't just exist in the physical realm. It's partially dimensional. It can phase through solid matter, but it needs a medium, a catalyst, that black fluid. It rewrites organic matter, but it needed to be contained, brought up from the abyss. And when you brought the Karen in, you brought it home." The lights on the console began to flicker. The message on the screen, "It's in the code," started to corrupt, the letters dissolving into jagged alien symbols. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Want? We're a mining corporation, Elias. We want to own it, to control it. Imagine an object that can phase through any defense, a soldier who can't be stopped. The applications are limitless. We just needed a way to communicate with it, to interface. And it seems it learns fast." Sterling's voice began to distort, the calm tone fracturing, interspersed with the same high-pitched static I heard before Dimitri's feed cut out. "It's in the code, in the signal. We thought we could control it. We made a mistake." The voice dissolved into a final, agonized vocalization, followed by the sound of wet tearing and then silence. I looked at the corrupted code on the screen. The presence wasn't just in the rig. It was in the rig systems. It had consumed Sterling and his team on the surface by traveling through the quantum comms link. It was in the machine. It was information. And I was in a room with a direct gateway to the rest of the world. My objective was no longer to escape. It was to neutralize the threat. The rig shuddered violently, and the last of the emergency lights went out, plunging me into total darkness. My headlamp cut a single panicked beam across the room. I could hear them. A soft, wet, slithering sound coming from the vents. They were coming for me. I looked at the main console. The self-destruct for the rig's fusion core required 2 separate authorizations from 2 different command stations. But a full system purge, a complete overload of the core, that could be initiated from here. It would be instantaneous. It would vaporize the entire rig, me, the creatures, and hopefully any trace of the signal. My light caught a flicker of movement by the door. A black tendril was probing the gap. My hands moved to the console. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the final moments of my life. I thought of Dimitri's terrified face, of Lena being dragged into the dark. We had dug too deep, blinded by greed. We had cracked open a tomb that should have remained sealed for eternity. The tendril slipped under the door. Then another. The slithering was all around me now. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath that tasted of ozone and salt, and initiated the sequence. A single alarm blared, a final defiant noise against the encroaching silence. The console flashed a message. "Reactor overload in 10, 9, 8. I didn't open my eyes. I just waited for the light. Don't watch the tapes, it was an odd job from the start. A police auction, clearing out an old evidence locker from a precinct that had been shut down for years. Most of it was standard fare. Dusty boxes of case files, a few decommissioned service revolvers, and a collection of confiscated items that ran the gamut from the mundane to the bizarre. My job, as an audiovisual archivist was to digitize any and all magnetic media before it was destroyed. It was a task I'd performed 100 times, a solitary but satisfying process of preservation. The box that changed everything was unassuming, a simple cardboard banker's box with no markings tucked away in the very back. Inside were about 24 VHS tapes, all unlabeled. The unlabeled black cassettes felt unnervingly cold in my gloved hands, the matte plastic strangely porous, absorbing the warmth from my fingertips even through the nitrile. A faint, acrid smell rose from the box, the distinct smell of decaying magnetic tape and ozone, the perfume of forgotten media. That should have been the first warning. My workspace is a small, climate-controlled room in the basement of the county records building, a tomb of forgotten information. The only company I have is the hum of the servers and the whir of my digitization decks. I set the first tape on the desk. It was heavy, solid. I slid it into the primary VCR, hit play, and started the capture software on my computer. Static. Then a grainy home video image appeared. A child's birthday party. The date stamp in the corner read 1998. It was painfully normal. I let it run, my eyes scanning the footage for anything of note while my hands were busy cataloging the next tape. After 20 minutes of cake and bad singing, the tape ended. I logged it as Tape 001 Juvenile Birthday Party 1998. No evidentiary value. I worked my way through a few more. Tape 002 was a news broadcast about a local festival. Tape 003 was a recording of a late-night movie. Mundane. Boring. My initial unease began to fade, replaced by the familiar lull of routine. Then I loaded Tape 04. It showed an empty room. A simple, featureless room with a single wooden chair in the center. The camera was static, the quality grainy. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. I was about to fast forward when the room shifted. It wasn't a camera trick. The walls seemed to breathe, the corners of the room subtly elongating and then contracting like a lung. The grain on the tape writhed and danced, forming fleeting, vocalizing faces that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The chair remained, impossibly still in the heart of the chaos. My hand trembled as I hit eject. Playback anomaly logged at ERA 1:15:32. Source signal exhibits non-standard frequency modulation. The tape came out with a clunk, and the VCR's display blinked 12 hours as if it had been reset. My computer's clock read 3:14 a.m. I should have stopped. I should have boxed the tapes back up, labeled them damaged, and sent them to the incinerator. That's what protocol demanded. Asset Integrity Protocol 7.4 was formally bypassed at 03:18. But I didn't. A morbid professional curiosity had taken root. I was an archivist. This was a record. My job was to preserve it, to understand it. I told myself it was just a corrupted tape, a magnetic anomaly. I made a pot of strong black coffee and loaded Tape 005. This one was different. It was handheld, shaky footage. A person walking through a dense, dark forest at night. The only light was the weak beam of the camera's built-in lamp. The only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot and the operator's ragged breathing. They were running from something. They kept glancing back, the camera whipping around to show nothing but impenetrable blackness between the trees. Then a sound, a low-frequency hum that grew in intensity, a bass note that I could feel in my teeth. The breathing on the tape became panicked gasps. The camera operator stumbled, falling to the ground. The view was of tangled roots and damp earth. The humming was deafening now. A shadow fell over the camera, impossibly large, blotting out the meager light. It wasn't a human shape. It was all angles and limbs, a geometric nightmare that unfolded itself in the darkness. There was a wet, tearing sound and a guttural expression that wasn't quite a vocalization. The tape cut to static. I felt physically ill. I ejected the tape and threw it across the room. It clattered against the far wall and lay still. I sat there in the sterile quiet of my archive, my heart hammering against my ribs. My professional detachment was gone, shattered. This wasn't just corrupted data. This was a recording of someone's last moments. I looked at the box of remaining tapes. They seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, a silent invitation. I knew I was breaking every rule, not just for my job, but for my own sanity. But I couldn't stop. I had to see the rest. Over the next few days, I descended into a self-imposed isolation, fueled by caffeine and a creeping dread. I stopped answering my phone. I ignored the emails from my supervisor asking for a progress report. My world had shrunk to the four walls of the archive and the flickering screen of the monitor. Each tape was a new chapter in a book I couldn't put down. Tape 009 showed a suburban house filmed from across the street. For an hour, nothing. Then, a window on the second floor began to glow with a soft blue light. The light pulsed, slowly at first, then faster, like a frantic heartbeat. The camera zoomed in, the image becoming a pixelated mess, but the light was undeniable. Then just as suddenly it went out. The tape ended. I cross-referenced the house's architecture with public records. The property had been the site of a family annihilation in 2002. The case was still unsolved. Tape 014 was security footage from a convenience store. A man stood in an aisle, his back to the camera. He didn't move. Customers and staff walked past him, around him, completely oblivious to his presence. He was like a statue. I watched for 30 minutes as the store bustled with life, all flowing around this single static point. Then the man slowly turned his head. He looked directly at the security camera. He had no face. It was a smooth, blank expanse of skin like a mannequin's head. There was no nose, no eyes, no mouth. Just a silent vocalization etched on its face. The footage distorted violently, melting into a swirl of color and noise before cutting out. I started taking meticulous notes, trying to find a pattern, a link between them. The dates were random, spanning 2 decades. The locations were all over the state. The only common denominator was the invisible entity, the presence that warped reality around it. It was never the subject of the tapes, but it was always there. In the shifting walls, the unnatural shadows, the faces in the static. It was a predator, and these tapes were its trophies. Who was filming and why? The obsession was total. I stopped sleeping. When I closed my eyes, I saw the faceless man, the breathing room, the angular shadow in the woods. I ate junk food from the vending machine down the hall. My reflection in the dark monitor screen showed a gaunt, wild-eyed stranger. I was becoming a part of the archive, another dusty record of a story nobody should read. The turning point was tape 021. The quality was better, newer. It was from a police interrogation room. A man sat at a table, his hands cuffed. He was rocking back and forth, muttering to himself. 2 detectives stood against the wall watching him. I recognized one of them from the news. Detective Miller, a local hero who had vanished without a trace a few years ago. The suspect in the chair looked up. His eyes were wide with a terror so profound it seemed to pull all the light in the room towards him. "You can't see it, but it's here," he whispered, his voice raspy. It came from the tapes. "It gets inside the tapes, oh." He started laughing, a high, unhinged sound. "Once you watch, you're a part of the collection. You're a new recording dad." He looked right at the camera, right at me. "It sees you now. It's watching you watch none." The video feed flickered. For a single frame, the face of the suspect was replaced by the faceless man from the convenience store. The detectives didn't react. They couldn't see it, but I could. The sound was a high-pitched electronic vocalization that made my fillings ache. My capture software crashed. My monitors went black. And then, the power in the entire basement went out, plunging me into absolute darkness and silence. I sat frozen, my breath caught in my throat. The familiar hum of the servers was gone. The only sound was my own frantic heartbeat. "It sees you now." The words echoed in the suffocating blackness. I scrambled for my phone, my fumbling fingers finding the flashlight app. The weak beam cut a pathetic swathe through the dark. The door to the archive was at the other end of the room. It felt a mile away. I grabbed a heavy-duty mag light from my emergency kit, its beam more substantial. I stood up, my legs shaking. The beam swept across the rows of shelving, filled with the orderly tapes of my normal life's work. They seemed like relics from another lifetime. My eyes were drawn to the VCR. The eject light was blinking, a tiny red eye in the dark. It hadn't been blinking before the power went out. The power to the VCR was dead. My training, my rational mind screamed at me to get out. "Run, don't look back." But the suspect's words held me fast. "You're a part of the collection." A cold dread, colder than any fear I had ever known, washed over me. I wasn't just a viewer anymore. I was a participant. Slowly, I walked towards the VCR. My flashlight beam illuminated the tape that I had thrown against the wall earlier. Tape 005, the one from the forest. It was back on the desk, sitting right next to the VCR. I hadn't put it there. The air grew heavy, thick with a static charge that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I could feel it. The presence. It was in the room with me. I backed away, shining the light into the corners of the office, expecting to see the angular shadow, the faceless man. But there was nothing. Just shelves, machines, and the oppressive waiting silence. The blinking red light on the VCR seemed to mock me. It was an invitation to continue the show. There were 3 tapes left in the box. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought seeing it through was the only way to end it. Maybe I had just gone insane. I walked back to the box, my movements stiff and robotic. I picked up the next tape, tape 022. It felt warm to the touch. I walked to the VCR, ignoring the screaming alarms in my head. The power was out. The machine shouldn't work. But as I brought the tape close to it, the VCR whirred to life with a sickening grinding sound. The front-loading tray opening like a hungry mouth. No lights, no display, just the mechanical noise in the dead silent room. I slid the tape in. The tray closed and the monitor on my desk, which should have been inert, flickered to life, bathing the room in a pale gray light. It showed my archive, my office, filmed from a high corner like a security camera. I could see myself, my back to the camera, standing in front of the monitor, watching. I didn't move. I just watched the screen, which showed a live feed of me watching the screen, an infinite loop of observation. On the tape, the me on the screen was unnaturally still. A statue in my own office. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the image. I was watching a recording of the present moment. The suspect's words came back to me. A new recording. Then on the screen something happened. A dark shape began to emerge from the shadows behind the recorded version of me. It was tall and thin, all sharp angles, just like the thing from the forest. It unfolded itself from the corner of the room, a piece of living geometry made of pure darkness. It moved without making a sound, gliding over the floor towards the back of the figure that was me. The real me, standing in the room, whipped around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The corner was empty. There was nothing there. I turned back to the monitor. The presence on screen was right behind me now, its long, spindly limbs reaching out. It placed a hand on my recorded shoulder. On the screen, I didn't flinch. I just stood there, watching my own voyeuristic recursion. I felt a sudden, intense cold on my real shoulder, a phantom pressure that burned like frostbite. I wanted to vocalize, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I was frozen, a prisoner in my own skin, forced to watch. The last thing I saw on the screen before it all went white was the faceless man standing where I had been, holding a camera. He was filming me. I don't know what happened after that. I woke up hours later, huddled on the floor. The sun was up and light was streaming in from the small high window in the hallway. The power was back on. The servers were humming. Everything was normal. The VCR was off. The tapes were in their box. It was as if nothing had happened, but something had. Scratched crudely into the plastic casing of my workstation monitor were the words, "Tape 025, the archivist." And laid out neatly on my desk were the final 2 tapes, and a brand new one I'd never seen before. A black cassette completely unmarked. It was still warm. The job was to digitize all magnetic media. To preserve the record, that's my job. I have to see what's on it. I have to finish the collection. The police found my predecessor in his home, surrounded by smashed televisions and VCRs. The walls of his living room were covered in thousands of feet of tangled magnetic tape, like a black, glossy nest. They said he'd had a complete psychotic break. On his desk, they found a single VHS tape labeled Tape 001. His final report simply said, "Don't watch the tapes." My workspace is a small, climate-controlled room in the basement of the county records building. It is a tomb of forgotten information. There is a box on my desk containing several tapes. One of them is warm. My job is to digitize any and all magnetic media before it is destroyed. That's what an archivist does. I have to preserve the record. My final report will be more thorough. I have to catalog what I've seen. I have to make them understand. The walls are starting to breathe again, and in the reflection of the dark screen in front of me, I can see someone standing behind me watching. He has no face, but I know he's smiling. I just have one more tape to watch. The pressure of silence. The descent was a slow, quiet fall into oblivion. Elias Miller, a saturation diver with 2 decades of experience etched into the lines around his eyes, monitored the readouts from within his submersible diving bell, the Karen, 402 UTC. The Bell's external sensors confirmed a depth of 3,100 meters. He guided the cairn toward the abyssal plain, its destination a deep-sea welding habitat nearly 2 miles beneath the waves. This was a place where the pressure was a physical entity, a constant, crushing hand of 300 atmospheres. His mission: relieve his partner, Ben Carter, after a 3-week stint on the Hermit's Shell habitat. It was a routine rotation, a milk run, but the absolute silence on the comms for the past 12 hours was anything but routine. UTC. The cairn achieved a soft dock with the Hermit's Shell saturation habitat. The exterior was just as he'd left it. A squat utilitarian cylinder of reinforced hyper-alloy steel bolted to the seafloor, its viewports dark and impassive. He initiated the coupling sequence, the magnetic clamps engaging with a dull thud that vibrated through the hull. He cycled through the entry lock, the prolonged hiss of equalizing pressure a familiar, almost comforting welcome. Inside, the lights were on a low-power setting, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to recoil from his presence. The air was cold and recycled. The high helium breathing mix left a distinct metallic dryness at the back of his throat. It carried the familiar tang of ozonated water and hot metal, but underneath it all, the faint, acrid smell of ozone from an overstressed CO2 scrubber permeated the recycled atmosphere, a sign of a system under strain. "Ben," Miller called out, his voice a reedy, high-pitched Donald Duck sound in the helium-rich air. "You giving me the silent treatment, you old coot?" Silence was the only reply. A half-eaten plate of nutrient paste sat on a small fold-down table, a fork resting beside it, the synthetic beef brother label on the discarded packet visible. A tablet displaying a paused chess game lay next to it. Ben was in check. It looked as if he had just stepped away mid-thought. Miller did a slow, methodical sweep of the main living quarters, his boots clanking softly on the grated deck plates. The bunk was empty, the sheets rumpled. The small galley was clean, utensils in their magnetic holders. The atmospheric control panel showed everything was nominal. Pressure, oxygen mix, temperature, all green. It was a perfectly preserved scene. The orderliness felt wrong. A sterile stage set for a play that had been abruptly canceled. His professional unease solidified into a cold knot in his stomach when he saw the weld. On the interior wall of the habitat, a section of the steel plating bore a fresh, jagged scar of molten metal, crude and hasty. It wasn't Ben's work. Ben's welds were art, precise and clean as a surgeon's incision. This was a panicked, ugly gash, sealed with excessive energy as if to keep something out, or in. The scar was about 3 feet long, a cauterized, angry purple against the cool gray of the hull. He ran a gloved hand over it. His glove's thermal sensor registered a residual temperature of 45 degrees Celsius. It was still warm. "Miller to surface, come in," he said, activating his helmet comms, his voice steady despite the tremor in his gut. "Comms check, latency is plus 0.5, acknowledge dial." The radio crackled with broadband static, the empty noise of the abyssal plain. "Surface, do you copy? I have arrived at Hermit's Shell. Interior is empty, signs of irregular activity observed. Requesting status update." He tried again, cycling through primary, secondary, and emergency UHF frequencies. Nothing but the same hissing static which now seemed to have an underlying rhythmic pulse. The 12 hours of silence now felt like an eternity. They were cut off. He was alone. He decided to check the exterior. Ben must have gone out for an emergency EVA repair and something had gone wrong. It was the only logical explanation that fit procedure. He suited up in the Goliath series hardsuit, the heavy atmospheric diving system encasing him in a thick shell of articulated titanium and reinforced polymer. It was an anthropomorphic submarine, his only shield against the pressure that would turn him to paste in an instant. The helmet locked into place with a pneumatic hiss, and the internal heads-up display flickered to life, showing his vitals, depth, suit integrity, and a sonar map of the immediate area. Stepping out of the habitat's airlock was like stepping into a void. The powerful LED lamps on his suit's shoulders cut a swathe through the inky blackness, illuminating a world of beige silt, bizarre, spindly-legged isopods, and the oppressive, absolute nothingness of the deep ocean. The water was so cold it felt thick, a gelid embrace that sucked the heat from his suit's power core. He panned his lights across the hull of the Hermit's Shell, looking for any sign of damage, any clue as to what Ben was trying to fix. He found it near the primary viewport. A deep symmetrical gouge was torn into the reinforced steel, a clear sign of catastrophic tensile failure from an internal point source. The metal was peeled back like a tin can, but the gouge wasn't from the outside. The metal was bent outwards. Something had tried to break out. Miller's breath hitched. That was impossible. The only thing inside was Ben. He moved closer, his thrusters firing in minute bursts, his lights tracing the jagged edges of the tear. And then he saw it. Tucked into the fissure, almost hidden, was a single shredded piece of Ben's dive suit. It was snagged on a shard of metal, a final desperate flag of orange against the dark hull. A cold dread, far more potent than the chill of the abyssal water, washed over him. He backed away from the habitat, his thrusters firing in small, panicked bursts, his light beam sweeping the surrounding darkness like a frantic searchlight. The silence of the deep was no longer peaceful. It was hungry. It was watchful. Every flicker of bioluminescence in the distance became a stalking eye, every creak and groan of his suit a prelude to an attack. He returned to the habitat, his mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. An external threat he could understand, a catastrophic equipment failure, an aggressive new species of giant squid. But this was an internal problem. The crude weld, the outward-facing damage. It felt like a prison cell, not a shelter. He had to re-examine everything. Back inside, he went directly to the habitat's master control terminal and began to pull the logs. He scrolled back through the environmental data, the communications logs, the system diagnostics. Everything was normal until 1347 Zulu yesterday. Log review confirms. Primary communications array failure at 1347 Zulu. Protocol dictates immediate secondary array activation. Logs show no such attempt was made. Instead, at that exact moment, there was a massive instantaneous power spike, a surge that overloaded the primary array. A split second later, the internal audio sensors registered a single sharp event, logged and classified by the system as non-human vocalization. Miller played the file. It was a piercing, high-frequency shriek, a sound that grated on the nerves, part dolphin click, part grinding metal. The analysis software failed to find a match against any known bioacoustic or mechanical signature. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough to make the hairs on Miller's arms stand on end. His dark residue ran cold. After that single sound, there was nothing. No more log entries from Ben, no more outgoing comms attempts, just 12 hours of perfect simulated normalcy. He moved to the medical bay, a tiny alcove with a diagnostic bed and supply cabinets. Everything seemed in order, until he noticed the diagnostic cutting object was missing from its wall mount. The high-powered tool, used for emergency minor surgeries, was gone. A deep sense of foreboding settled over him. What would Ben need a diagnostic cutting object for? His search became more frantic. He checked storage lockers under the bunk in the small waste disposal unit. Nothing. Ben Carter had vanished. But the feeling of being watched intensified with every passing second. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to lengthen and writhe when he wasn't looking directly at them. The constant low hum of the life support systems began to sound like a low guttural growl. He was making a circuit back to the main console when his foot caught on something under the fold-down table. He knelt, pulling back the table leg. It was a data slate, a different one from the chess game. It was Ben's personal log. Miller's heart hammered against his ribs as he powered it on. The screen flickered, displaying a wall of text, a single final entry. Entry 47. I don't know what it is. It came from the sample. Geosample GS734 from the hydrothermal vent. Just a rock. But it wasn't just a rock. The crystalline structure I logged. It wasn't inert. Subaudible resonance detected, $15 Hz. It was singing. Not a sound. Not really. A vibration. A pressure in my head. I put it in the analyzer and it just hatched. Not a creature of flesh and bone. Something else. Something of pure pressure. A knot in the water made solid, I saw it. A shimmer in the air, a localized distortion. It has no shape, but it has a presence. It learned. It's been watching me, learning me. It understands the systems. It understands me. It whispered my name. Not with a voice. It pushed the word into my skull. Miller dropped the slate. It clattered to the floor, the screen cracking. The sample container in the small geology lab. He had to check. He scrambled to the lab, a closet-sized room filled with microscopes and analysis equipment. The containment box for the vent sample GS734 was on the counter. It was empty. The lid was slightly ajar. I tried to neutralize it. The log continued in his memory. I trapped it in the maintenance conduit, welded it shut, but it's pushing back. The pressure, oh God, the pressure. It's not just outside anymore. It's inside. It's trying to get out of the habitat. Out of me, it wants the ocean. It's too small in here, too small in this body. Miller's eyes shot to the crude weld on the wall. The maintenance conduit. Ben hadn't been trying to keep something out. He'd trapped it in the walls of the habitat. And the damage on the exterior, Ben had tried to break out to escape what was inside him. Not the habitat, but his own body. He had taken the diagnostic cutting object to cut his way out of his own suit. He backed away from the lab, his eyes darting around the main room. The dancing shadows were no longer figments of his imagination. He could feel it now. A pressure in his ears, a subtle vibration in the deck plates, a low hum that wasn't coming from the machinery. It was coming from the walls. The lights in the habitat flickered. Then they went out, plunging him into absolute darkness, a blackness more complete than even the abyss outside. 341 UTC, main power failure, emergency backup system engaged. His heart seized. He fumbled for his headlamp, his fingers shaking. The beam sprang to life, a lonely cone of light in the suffocating dark. Ben, he whispered, the name of fragile prayer. A soft scraping sound came from the other side of the room. Near the bunk, Miller swung his light, the beam cutting through the darkness. He saw a figure standing silhouetted against the far wall. It was wearing a dive suit, Ben's suit, but it was standing stiffly, unnaturally, its joints locked at odd angles. The helmet was dark, the faceplate impossible to see. Ben, thank God, Miller breathed, relief flooding him. What the hell happened? The power's out, the comms. The figure took a step forward. A wet, dragging step. It wasn't walking. It was being pulled, as if its joints were being hyperextended by an internal force, like a marionette. Another step. A thick, dark residue began to leak from the seals of the suit's joints. An inky, non-Newtonian substance that wasn't hydraulic fluid. It pooled on the floor, glistening in his flashlight beam. Ben? Miller's voice trembled into a high-pitched squeak. The figure raised a hand. Slowly, deliberately. In its grip was the diagnostic cutting object. Its power cell glowed a faint, menacing red. The figure didn't speak. It didn't have to. A voice, cold and ancient, bloomed inside Miller's mind. A wave of pure pressure that made his teeth ache. Too small. The figure lunged. Miller scrambled back, tripping over the discarded data slate. The world devolved into a chaotic slideshow of his flashlight beam. The faint red glint of the object. The dark, glistening figure moving with an unnatural, fluid grace. The hiss of compressed air. A terrible, wet, tearing sound echoed through the habitat, followed by a final choked vocalization that was abruptly cut off. Then, silence. A silence more profound, more absolute than any Miller had ever known. A silence that was a living thing, a crushing weight that filled every corner of the small metal room. Minutes or maybe hours later, the main emergency power kicked in. A dim red light filled the habitat. In the center of the room, Miller's Goliath hard suit lay on its back, its chest plate precisely and surgically carved open. The helmet's faceplate was shattered. From the gaping hole in the suit, a thick, dark residue was seeping out, crawling across the deck plating like an oil slick. It was moving towards the outer airlock, towards the 2-mile column of water, towards the crushing, silent, and now very welcoming freedom of the abyss. Inside the habitat, the figure of Ben Carter stood motionless, its head tilted as if listening. The diagnostic cutting object fell from its hand, clattering to the floor. The suit's arms dropped limply to its sides. It was just an empty shell now. A discarded container. The true inhabitant, the presence that had worn the skin of a man, was gone. And in the suffocating silence of the deep, the hermit's shell waited for its next occupant as a single line appeared on the habitat's main console. Gyujuruwaru. UTC system status. Stable. Life signs 0 awaiting crew rotation. Incident report level 4 containment. This is the final audio log of Dr. Eris Thorne, lead xenobiologist, Aegis Corporation. If you are hearing this, then the quarantine of sublevel 4 designation, the silo, has failed. And Commander Rostova and the others, they are gone. Do not attempt retrieval. Do not attempt contact. Initiate the Archimedes protocol. Purge this facility from the Earth. There is nothing left to save. It started 52 hours ago. Log timestamp 52 Myanmar pre-incident. We descended in the reinforced containment elevator, a silent tungsten steel box dropping through a kilometer of solid Archean rock. Commander Eva Rostova stood impassive, her Aegis issue XM5 armor polished to a matte black, her face a mask of hardened professionalism. Her gaze was fixed on the descending floor numbers as they flickered on the overhead display. Beside her, specialists Kenji Tanaka and Lena Petrova ran final systems checks on their bioscanners and containment foamers, their movements economical and precise within the cramped space. The displays on their gauntlets glowed a steady, reassuring green. I, by comparison, felt like a bundle of frayed nerves, my own diagnostic tablet feeling slick in my gloved hands. My place was in a sterile lab, behind 3 inches of reinforced polyglass, not on the front line of a potential Category 4 biohazard incident. Vitals, Thorn. Rostova's voice filtered through the comms, cut through the low vibrato of the elevator's descent. Your heart rate is elevated by 12%. Unstable, Commander. I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I'm just eager to get a look at the samples. The pre-blackout telemetry from the on-site team was fascinating. The silo was our deepest, most secure biological containment facility, a marvel of engineering built to house xenological specimens of unknown origin and potential threat. We were Team Epsilon, the rapid response unit for when things went wrong in the deep dark. This time it was a simple communications blackout on level 4, a hardline severance, probably a faulty relay or a generator glitch cascading through the system. That's what we told ourselves. A comforting liturgy of mundane possibilities against a growing, unspoken dread. The elevator doors hissed open, revealing the antechamber to the silo. The air was thick with a coppery tang, overlaid with the sharp, acrid smell of ozone from overworked air scrubbers. Emergency lights, spaced every 10 meters, cast long, distorted shadows down the main corridor, creating a nauseating strobing effect as we moved. It was unnervingly quiet. No hum of the main power grid, no automated announcements, no chatter from the 40-person on-site research team. Just the sound of our own breathing through our rebreather masks and the faint, high-frequency whine of failing capacitors, a sound that set my teeth on edge. Log entry timestamp 0415. Rostova stated, her voice flat and formal. Environmental seals are holding. Thorn, begin atmospheric sampling. Proceed, current power is offline. Emergency power only, Tanaka reported, his voice a calm drone in our comms as he interfaced with a nearby junction box. Main grid is completely cold. Life support is nominal but strained, running at 60%, drawing heavily from the backup cells. No signs of personnel on any local sensors. Rostova tapped her chronocomputer. Protocol was violated at 3:47. We're blind. Fan out. Standard sweep formation. Petrova, Tanaka, you have the labs flanking the main concourse. Secure the perimeter. Thorn, you're with me. We checked the primary lab. We moved like specters through the sterile white halls of the facility. Our boots made soft, rhythmic thuds on the polished composite floor. Every corner, every automated doorway that now stood agape felt like a gaping maw. The silence was a physical pressure against my eardrums, a profound absence of noise that felt heavier than any sound. We'd trained for this, of course. Weeks in VR simulations, facing down every conceivable horror the corporate trainers could imagine. Hostile organism drills, psychic entity incursions, viral outbreaks. But the simulations never captured the profound, gut-wrenching wrongness of a place that should be bustling with life, but was instead utterly, deathly still. The pristine Aegis logo stenciled on the walls seemed to mock us. We found the first anomaly in the mess hall. The tables were set for the midnight meal rotation that was never eaten. Trays of synthetic protein paste sat under heat lamps that had long since cooled, the paste congealing into a rubbery skin, but it was the walls that drew our attention. They were covered in sprawling, complex geometric patterns, drawn in a thick, dark residue that looked disturbingly organic. It wasn't ink. It wasn't paint. My handheld bioscanner whirred, its processor struggling to classify the atypical organic compound. What do you make of it, Thorn? Rostova asked, her hand resting on the stock of her pulse object. Her posture hadn't changed, but I could see the minute tension in her shoulders. I don't know. I stammered, tracing one of the symbols with my scanner's targeting laser. The patterns are non-Euclidean fractal in nature. They seem to shift, to fold in on themselves when you're not looking directly at them. The material is organic, but riddled with chronoton particles. The cellular structure is collapsing and reforming in real time. It's physically impossible. Nothing's impossible down here, she said grimly. It's just not yet understood. Or it's trying to neutralize you. Log the pattern. That's when Petrova's voice crackled over the comms, tight with a panic that broke through her disciplined training. Commander, you need to see this. Med bay. Now. We found her standing in the doorway to the medical bay, her object leveled, her body rigid. The scene inside was one of quiet, ordered horror. 3 members of the research team were on their automated med beds, tucked in neatly under thermal blankets, their eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling with a placid, empty look. There were no wounds, no signs of a struggle. They looked peaceful, as if they had simply laid down and willed themselves to die. No life signs, Tanaka said from beside Petrova, his own scanner confirming my readings. All 3 are deceased, cause of death. Indeterminate. It's like their biological processes just stopped. I moved closer, stepping over a discarded data slate. My instrument clicked in Word, its diagnostic sensors running at maximum. Cellular decay is minimal. Rigor mortis hasn't even set in, which is wrong. Based on the estimated time of the comms blackout, they should be further along. I leaned over one of the scientists, a Dr. Chen, a brilliant astrophysicist I'd shared coffee with just last week. I zoomed my scanner's optical sensor in on her eye. Her pupil was a perfect black void, and for a split second I saw the light from my scanner not reflect but fall into it. For a terrifying, vertiginous instant I thought I saw the stars within it, wheeling in some vast cosmic darkness. I recoiled, stumbling back into a biomonitor stand. Commander, their neural activity, it's not zero. The EEG is flatlining, but there's a subharmonic frequency, a low-level synchronized pattern across all 3 subjects, like they're all dreaming the same dream. Before Rostova could process that unsettling data, a low guttural moan echoed from the far end of the corridor. It wasn't human. It was a wet, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones, a noise that felt both ancient and utterly alien. Contact, Rostova commanded, her voice steel. Formation Delta. Thorn, stay behind me. We advanced down the hallway toward the primary containment chamber, the source of the sound. The massive, meter-thick circular vault door stood ajar, its adamantium locking mechanisms sheared clean off from the inside. The metal curled back like peeled tin foil. A thick, inky fog, unnaturally cold to the touch, billowed out from the opening, pooling around our feet and clinging to our armor. Tanaka took point, his heavy-duty pulse object raised. The thermal is useless. This fog is some kind of energy-dampening aerosol. It's blocking all active sensors. Then we go in blind, Rostova said. Eyes up. Watch the corners. The primary lab was a cathedral of science, a 3-story high cylinder with the central containment spire at its heart. The spire, a pillar of transparent aluminum designed to hold specimen 734 under multiple energy fields, was shattered. Shards of the supposedly unbreakable material littered the floor like broken glass. The fog was thicker in here, swirling in lazy, unnatural currents that defied the room's ventilation system. And the walls? The same impossible geometry was everywhere, no longer static but pulsing with a faint internal violet light. The air tasted of static electricity and cold stone. In the center of the room, near the base of the broken spire, were the other figures of the research staff. They weren't lying peacefully. They were arranged in a circle, their bodies contorted into the same impossible shapes as the patterns on the walls. They were less like figures and more like sculptures of flesh and bone, their limbs twisted and interwoven at angles that defied anatomy. Their faces were all turned inward toward the spire, their mouths open in a silent, collective vocalization. My God, Petrova whispered, her voice barely audible. That's when we saw it. The thing that had been specimen 734. It was no longer contained. It hung in the air where the spire used to be, a vortex of shifting shadows and fractured light. It had no definite shape or form. It was a living, moving impossibility, a localized distortion in space-time. It was a hole in the fabric of reality, and looking at it felt like my mind was being unspooled, my thoughts fraying at the edges. "Fall back," Rostova yelled, raising her object.
Fall back now.
But it was too late. Tanaka, who was closest to the entity, suddenly froze. He lowered his object. A slow, serene smile spread across his face. "It's beautiful," he breathed, his voice an awed whisper in our comms. "The pattern, I see it now. It's all so clear." He took a step forward, then another, his boots crunching on the shattered spire fragments. "Tanaka, no," Petrova vocalized, reaching for him, her training momentarily forgotten. The presence pulsed, a wave of visible distortion expanding from its non-existent core. As it washed over Tanaka, he simply came apart, not in an explosion of dark residue and viscera. He disassembled. His body unfolded into a series of interconnected lines and angles, a perfect horrific replication of the symbols on the wall, before collapsing into a shower of fine, gray dust that the fog quickly consumed. We were paralyzed by the sheer conceptual wrongness of it. Petrova let out a raw, terrified vocalization that was cut short as she too was caught in the entity's gaze. She didn't smile. She just raised her object, but her hands were shaking uncontrollably. The heavy pulse object clattered to the floor. She slowly, mechanically turned to face Rostova and me. Her eyes were black voids, just like the figures in the medbay. "We must complete the pattern," she said, her voice a flat, emotionless monotone that was not her own. "The vessel must be made whole." She started walking toward us, her movements jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Rostova didn't hesitate. She fired a single, tight burst from her pulse object. The superheated plasma bolt struck Petrova in the chest, and for a moment they did nothing. Then, like Tanaka, she unfolded. Her body became a sterile geometric shape before dissolving into motes of dust. "Eris, run!" Rostova vocalized, providing covering fire. Bursts of plasma sizzled and vanished as they were swallowed by the swirling void of the entity. It didn't seem to notice. It was indifferent, like a force of nature. We ran. We fled through the labyrinthine corridors, the guttural moaning echoing from all directions now, as if the walls themselves were groaning. The geometry was spreading, the patterns bleeding across the floors and ceilings, the very architecture of the silo seeming to twist and warp around us. Hallways stretched into impossible lengths, and doorways appeared where none had been before. We passed more figures, former security guards and staff, all standing motionless, their eyes empty voids, their lips whispering silent, synchronized prayers to the burgeoning pattern. We made it to the elevator, Rostova slamming her palm on the scorched activation panel. The doors began to groan shut with agonizing slowness. Through the narrowing gap I saw them, the remaining figures of the research team, moving in a horrific unison, their limbs cracking and popping as they shuffled toward us. And behind them, the dark, shifting presence of the entity from the lab began to pour into the corridor like a flood of living ink. Rostova shoved me hard into the elevator. "Go, initiate Archimedes. It's the only way." "Neva, no," I vocalized, trying to hold the doors. "We can... there is no we," she said, her face grim but resolute, lit by the red emergency light. Their minds, it links them. It's a presence that thinks, it learns. It's already assimilated Tanaka and Petrova. It knows our protocols. It knows our extraction procedures. It knows how to escape." She pushed me back with surprising strength. "And I'll buy you time. I will not let the pattern be completed." Through the closing doors, my last sight of her was her turning to face the approaching horde. She raised her pulse object one last time, not at the shambling figures, but at the main power conduit running along the ceiling. A thick, bundled cable sparking with raw energy. "For the corporation," she said, her voice calm and clear over the comms, a final defiant report. Then she fired. The explosion was immense. A flash of pure white light, the sound of tearing metal, and a concussive blast that threw the elevator car upward. My last image of Commander Eva Rostova was of her being consumed by the fire of her own making. A final defiant act to neutralize not just them, but herself, to keep the entity from learning what she knew. The elevator shot up through the shaft, its emergency brakes shrieking against the guide rails. Then, with a final groan of tortured metal, silence. I am now in the level 3 antechamber. The elevator is fused shut. I am trapped, but I can still hear it, not with my ears, but in my head. A low, persistent hum, the whisper of a pattern trying to complete itself. It knows I'm here. It's patient. It's scraping at the edges of my thoughts, showing me things. Galaxies being born and dying in the blink of an eye. The silent music of quantum strings. The perfect, beautiful, terrifying geometry of all existence. It is promising me clarity. It is promising me peace. I have barricaded the door with salvaged equipment. My service pistol, a standard sidearm I never thought I'd use, has 1 round. I will not be a piece in its design. I will not let the pattern be completed. My name is Dr. Thorn. The entity must not escape. Do not try to rescue me. Do not come down here. For the love of God, initiate the Archimedes protocol. Purge this place. Neutralize this recording. It may already be too late.